Book 2, Chapter 6 of Growth of the Soil by Knut Hamsun, translated by W. W. Worcester. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6. The rest of the workmen came down from the mine. Work is stopped. The field lies dead again. The building at Solonra, too, is finished now. There is a makeshift roof of turf put on for the winter. The great space beneath is divided into rooms, bright apartments, a great salon in the middle, and large rooms at either end, as if it were for human beings. Here Isak once lived in a turf hut together with a few goats. There is no turf hut to be seen now at Solonra. Loose boxes, mangers, and bins are fitted up. The two stoneworkers are busy now, kept on to get the whole thing finished as soon as possible. But Gustav is no hand at woodwork, so he says, and he is leaving. Gustav has been a splendid lad at the stonework, heaving and lifting like a bear, and in the evenings, a joy and delight to all, playing his mouth organ, not to speak of helping the womenfolk, carrying heavy pails to and from the river. But he is going now. No, Gustav is no hand at woodwork, so he says. It looks almost as if he were in a hurry to get away. Can't it wait till tomorrow? Says Inger. No, it can't wait. He's no more work to do here, and besides, going now, he will have company across the hills, going over with the last gang from the mines. And who's to help me with my buckets now? Says Inger, smiling sadly. But Gustav is never at a loss. He has his answer ready, and says, Halmar. Now Halmar was the younger of the two stoneworkers, but neither of them was young as Gustav himself, none like him in any way. Halmar, huh, says Inger contemptuously. Then suddenly she changes her tone, and turns to Gustav, thinking to make him jealous. Though, after all, he's nice to have on the place as Halmar, says she, and so prettily he sings and all. Don't think much of him anyway, says Gustav. He does not seem jealous in the least. But you might stay one more night at least. No, Gustav couldn't stay one more night. He was going across with the others. Ay, maybe Gustav was getting tired of the game by now. 'Twas a fine thing to snap her up in front of all the rest, and have her for his own the few weeks he was there. But he was going elsewhere now, like as not to a sweetheart at home. He had other things in view. Was he to stay on loafing about here for the sake of her? He had reason enough for bringing the thing to an end, as she herself must know, but she was grown so bold, so thoughtless of any consequence. She seemed to care for nothing. No, things had not held for very long between them, but long enough to last out the spell of his work there. Inger is sad and downhearted enough, ay, so erringly faithful she mourns for him. 'Tis hard for her. She is honestly in love, without any thought of vanity or conquest. And not ashamed, no. She is a strong woman, full of weakness. She is but following the law of nature all about her. It is the glow of autumn in her, as in all things else. Her breast heaves with feeling as she packs up food for Gustav to take with him. No thought of whether she has the right, or whether she dare risk this or that. She gives herself up to it entirely, hungry to taste, to enjoy. Isak might lift her up to the roof and thrust her to the floor again. Ay, what of that? It would not make her feel the less. She goes out with the parcel to Gustav. Now she had set the bucket by the steps on purpose, in case he should care to go with her to the river just once more. Maybe she would like to say something, to give him some little thing, her gold ring. Heaven knows, she was in a state to do anything. But there must be an end of it some time. Gustav thanks her, says good-bye, and goes. And there she stands. Halmar, she calls out aloud. Oh, so much louder than she need. As if she were determined to be gay in spite of it all, or crying out in distress. Gustav goes on his way. All through that autumn there was the usual work in the fields all round, right away down to the village. Potatoes to be taken up, corn to be got in, the horned cattle let loose over the ground. 8 farms there are now, and all are busy. But at the trading station at Storborg there are no cattle and no green lands, only a garden. And there is no trade there now, and nothing for any to be busy about there. They have a new root crop at Sellanraa called turnips, sending up a colossal growth of green waving leaves out of the earth, and nothing can keep the cows away from them. The beasts break down all hedgework and storm in, bellowing. Nothing for it but to set Leopoldine and little Rebecca to keep guard over the turnip fields, and little Rebecca walks with a big stick in her hand, and is a wonder at driving cows away. Her father is at work close by. Now and again he comes to feel her hands and feet, and ask if she is cold. Leopoldine is big and grown up now. She can knit stockings and mittens for the winter while she is watching the herds. Born in Trondheim was Leopoldine, and came to Sellanraa 5 years old. But the memory of a great town with many people, and of a long voyage on a steamer, is slipping away from her now, growing more and more distant. She is a child of the wilds, and knows nothing now of the great world beyond the village down below, where she has been to church once or twice, and where she was confirmed the year before. And the little casual work of every day goes on, with this thing and that to be done beside. As, for instance, the road down below, that is getting bad 1 or 2 places. The ground is still workable, and Isak goes down one day with Sivert, ditching and draining the road. There are 2 patches of bog to be drained. Axel Ström has promised to take part in the work, seeing that he has a horse and uses the road himself, but Axel had pressing business in the town just then. Heaven knows what it could be, but very pressing, he said it was. But he had asked his brother from Breidablik to work with them in his stead. Fredrik was this brother's name, a young man, newly married, a light-hearted fellow who could make a jest, but none the worse for that. Sivert and he are something alike. Now Fredrik had looked in at Storborg on his way up that morning, Aronson of Storborg being his nearest neighbour, and he is full of all the trader has been telling him. It began this way. Fredrik wanted a roll of tobacco. "I'll give you a roll of tobacco when I have one," said Aronson. "What? You've no tobacco in the place?" "No, nor won't order any. There's nobody to buy it. What do you think I make out of 1 roll of tobacco?" Ay, Aronson had been in a nasty humour that morning, sure enough. Felt he had been cheated somehow by the Swedish mining concern. Here had he set up a store out in the wilds, and then they go and shut the work down altogether. Fredrik smiles slyly at Aronson and makes fun of him now. "He's not so much as touched that land of his," says he, "and hasn't even feed for his beasts, but must go and buy it. Asked me if I'd any hay to sell. No, I'd no hay to sell. Ho! Do you mean you don't want to make money?" said Aronson. "Thinks money's everything in the world, seems like. Puts down 100 krone note on the counter and says, 'Money.' Ay, money's well enough, says I. 'Cash down,' says he. Ay, he's just a little bit touched that way, so to speak. And his wife, she goes about with a watch and chain and all on weekdays. Lord he knows what can be she's so set on remembering to the minute." Says Sivert, "Did Aronson say anything about a man named Geissler?" "Ay, said something about he'd be wanting to sell some land he'd got. And Aronson was wild about it, he was. Fellow that used to be Lensman and got turned out, he said. And like as not without so much as 5 krone in his books and ought to be shot." "Ay, but wait a bit," says I, "and maybe he'll sell after all." "Nay," says Aronson, "don't you believe it. I'm a business man," says he, "and I know, when one party puts up a price of 250,000 and the other offers 25,000, there's too big a difference. There'll be no deal ever to come out of that. Well, let 'em go their own way, and see what comes of it, says he. I only wish I'd never set my foot in this hole, and a poor thing it's been for me and mine. Then I asked him if he didn't think of selling out himself. Ay, says he, and that's just what I'm thinking of. This bit of bogland, says he, a hole and a desert, I'm not making a single krona the whole day now, says he. They laughed at Aronsen, and had no pity for him at all. Think he'll sell out, says Isak. Well, he didn't speak of it, and he's got rid of the lad he had already. Ay, a curious man, a queer sort of man. That Aronsen, 'tis sure. Sends away his lad could be working on the place getting in winter fuel and carting hay, with that horse of his, but keeps on his storeman, chief clerk he calls him. 'Tis true enough, as he says, not selling so much as a krona all day, for he's no stock in the place at all. And what does he want with a chief clerk, then? I doubt it'll be just by way of looking grand and making a show. Must have a man there to stand at a desk and write up things in books. Ha ha ha! Ay, looks like he's just a little bit touched that way, is Aronsen. The three men worked till noon, ate food from their baskets, and talked a little. They had matters of their own to talk over, matters of good and ill to folk on the land. No trifles to them, but things to be discussed warily. They are clear-minded folk, their nerves unworn, and not flying out where they should not. It is the autumn season now, a silence in the woods all around. The hills are there, the sun is there, and at evening the moon and the stars will come, all regular and certain, full of kindliness and embrace. Men have time to rest here, to lie in the heather, with an arm for a pillow. Fredrik talks of Breidablik, how 'tis but little he's got done there yet a while. Nay, says Isak, 'tis none so little already. I saw when I was down that way. This was praise from the oldest among them, the giant himself, and Fredrik might well be pleased. He asks, frankly enough, do you think so now? Well, it'll be better before long. I've had a deal of things to hinder this year, the house to do up, being leaky and like to fall to pieces. Hayloft to take down and put up again, and no sort of room in the turf hut for beasts, seeing I'd cow and heifer more than breed he'd ever had in his time, says Fredrik proudly. And you're thriving like up there, says Isak. Ay, I'll not say no. And wife, she's thriving too. Why shouldn't we? There's good room and outlook all about. We can see up and down the road both ways, and a neat little copse by the house, all pretty to look at, birch and willow. I'll plant a bit more other side of the house when I've time. And it's fine to see how the bogland's dried only since last year's ditching. 'Tis all a question now, what'll grow on her this year. Ay, thrive. When we've house and home and land and all, 'tis enough for two of us, surely. Ho, says Sivert slyly. And the two of you, is that all there's ever to be? Why, as to that, says Fredrik bravely, 'tis like enough there'll be more to come. And as to thriving, well, the wife's not falling off anyway, by the looks of her. They work on until evening, drawing up now and again to straighten their backs and exchange a word or two. And so you didn't get the tobacco, says Sivert. No, that's true, but 'twas no loss, for I've no use for it anyway, says Fredrik. No use for tobacco? Nay, 'twas but for to drop in at Aronsen's like, and hear what he'd got to say. And the two jesters laughed together at that. On the way home, father and son talked little, as was their way. But Isak must have been thinking out something for himself. He says, Sivert? Ay, says Sivert again. Nay, 'twas nothing. They walk on a good ways, and Isak begins again. How's he get on then, with his trading, Aronsen, when he's nothing to trade with? Nay, says Sivert, but there's not folk enough here now for him to buy for. Ho, you think so? Why, I suppose 'tis so. Ay, well. Sivert wondered a little at this. After a while, his father went on again. There's but 8 places now and all, and there might be more before long. More, well, I don't know. Sivert wondered more than ever, what can his father be getting at? The pair of them walk on a long way in silence. They are nearly home now. Says Isak. What you think Aronsen he'd ask for that place of his now? Oh, that's it, says Sivert. Want to buy it, do you? He asks jestingly. But suddenly he understands what it all means. 'Tis Eleseus the old man has in mind. Oh, he's not forgotten him after all, but kept him faithfully in mind, just as his mother, only in his own way, nearer earth, and nearer to Sellanraa. "'Twill be going for a reasonable price, I doubt," says Sivert. And when Sivert says so much, his father knows the lad has read his thought. And as if in fear of having spoken out too clearly, he falls to talking of their road mending. A good thing they had got it done at last. For a couple of days after that, Sivert and his mother were putting their heads together and holding councils and whispering. Ay, they even wrote a letter. And when Saturday came round, Sivert suddenly wanted to go down to the village. "What do you want to go down village again for now?" said his father in displeasure. "Wearing boots to rags." Oh, Isak was more bitter than need be. He knew well enough that Sivert was going to the post. "Going to church," says Sivert. 'Twas all he could find by way of excuse, and his father muttered, "Well, what you want to go for?" But if Sivert was going to church, why, he might harness up and take little Rebecca with him. Little Rebecca, ay, surely she might have that bit of a treat for once in her life, after being so clever, guarding turnips and being all ways the pearl and blessing of them all. Ay, that she was. And they harnessed up, and Rebecca had the maid Jensine to look after her on the way, and Sivert never said a word against that either. While they are away, it so happens that Aronsen's man, his chief clerk from Storborg, comes up the road. What does this mean? Why, nothing very much. 'Tis only Andresen, the chief clerk from Storborg, come up for a bit of a walk this way, his master having sent him. Nothing more. And no great excitement among the folk at Sellanraa over that. 'Twas not as in the old days, when a stranger was a rare sight on their new land, and Inger made a great to-do. No, Inger's grown quieter now, and keeps to herself these days. A strange thing, that book of devotion, a guide upon the way, an arm round one's neck, no less. When Inger had lost hold of herself a little, lost her way a little, out plucking berries, she found her way home again by the thought of her new little chamber and the holy book. Ay, she was humble now, and a God-fearing soul. She can remember long years ago when she would say an evil word if she pricked her finger sewing. So she had learned to do from her fellow workers round the big table in the institute. But now she pricks her finger, and it bleeds, and she sucks the blood away in silence. 'Tis no little victory gained to change one's nature so. And Inger did more than that. When all the workmen were gone, and the stone building was finished, and Sellanraa was all forsaken and still, then came a critical time for Inger. She cried a deal, and suffered much. She blamed none but herself for it all, and she was deeply humbled. If only she could have spoken out to Isak, and relieved her mind. But that was not their way at Sellanraa. There was none of them would talk their feelings and confess things. All she could do was to be extra careful in the way she asked her husband to come in to meals, going right up to him to say it nicely, instead of shouting from the door. And in the evenings she looked over his clothes and sewed buttons on. Ay, and even more she did. One night she lifted up on her elbow and said, "Isak?" "What is it?" says Isak. "Are you awake?" "Ay." "Ay, 'twas nothing," says Inger, "but I've not been all as I ought." "What?" says Isak. Ay, so much he said, and rose up on his elbow in turn. They lay there and went on talking. Inger is a matchless woman, after all, and with a full heart. "I've not been as I ought towards you," she says, "and I'm that sorry about it." The simple words move him. This barge of a man is touched. Ay, he wants to comfort her, knowing nothing of what is the matter, and only that there is none like her. "Not to cry about, my dear," says Isak. "There's none of us can be as we ought." "Nay, 'tis true," she answers gratefully. Oh, Isak had a strong, sound way of taking things, straightened them out, he did, when they turned crooked. None of us can be as we ought. Ay, he was right. The God of the heart, for all that he is a God. He goes a deal of crooked ways, goes out adventuring, the wild thing that he is, and we can see it in his looks. One day rolling in a bed of roses and licking his lips and remembering things, next day with a thorn in his foot, desperately trying to get it out. Die of it? Never a bit, he's as well as ever. A nice lookout it would be if he were to die. And Inger's trouble passed off too, she got over it, but she keeps on with her hours of devotion, and finds a merciful refuge there. Hard-working and patient and good she is now every day, knowing Isak different from all other men, and wanting none but him. No gay young spark of a singer, true, in his looks and ways, but good enough, ay, good enough indeed. And once more it is seen that the fear of the Lord and contentment therewith are a precious gain. And now it was that the little chief clerk from Storborg, Andresen, came up to Sellanraa one Sunday, and Inger was not in the least affected, far from it. She did not so much as go in herself to give him a mug of milk, but sent Leopoldine in with it, by reason that Jensine the maid was out. And Leopoldine could carry a mug of milk as well as need be, and she gave it him and said, "Here you are," and blushed. For all she was wearing her Sunday clothes, and had nothing to be ashamed of anyway. "Thanks, 'tis overkind of you," says Andresen. "Is your father at home?" says he. "Ay, he'll be about the place somewhere." Andresen drank and wiped his mouth with a handkerchief, and looked at the time. "Is it far up to the mines?" he asked. "No, 'tis an hour's walk, or hardly that." "I'm going to look over them, do you see, for him. Aronsen, I'm his chief clerk." "Oh." "You'll know me yourself, no doubt. I'm Aronsen's chief clerk. You've been down buying things at our place before." "Ay." "And I remember you well enough," says Andresen. "You've been down twice buying things." "'Tis more than could be thought, you'd remember that," says Leopoldine, and had no more strength after that, but stood holding by a chair. But Andresen had strength enough, he went on, and said, "Remember you? Well, of course I should." And he said more. "You wouldn't like to walk up to the mine with me?" said he. And a little after something went wrong with Leopoldine's eyes. Everything turned red and strange about her, and the floor was slipping away from under, and Chief Clerk Andresen was talking from somewhere ever so far off, saying, "Couldn't you spare the time?" "No," says she. And heaven knows how she managed to get out of the kitchen again. Her mother looked at her and asked what was the matter. "Nothing," said Leopoldine. Nothing, no, of course. But now, look you, 'twas Leopoldine's turn to be affected, to begin the same eternal round. She was well fitted for the same, overgrown and pretty and newly confirmed. An excellent sacrifice she would make. A bird is fluttering in her young breast. Her long hands are like her mother's, full of tenderness, full of sex. Could she dance? Ay, indeed she could. A marvel when she managed to learn it, but learn it they did at Sellanraa as well as elsewhere. Sivert could dance, and Leopoldine too, a kind of dancing peculiar to the spot, growth of the new cleared soil, a dance with energy and swing. Schottische, mazurka, waltz and polka in one. And could not Leopoldine deck herself out and fall in love and dream by daylight all awake? Ay, as well as any other. The day she stood in church she was allowed to borrow her mother's gold ring to wear, no sin in that, 'twas only neat and nice. And the day after, going to her communion, she did not get the ring on till it was over. Ay, she might well show herself in church with a gold ring on her finger, being the daughter of a great man on the place, the Margrave. When Andersen came down from the mine, he found Isak at Sellanraa, and they asked him in, gave him dinner and a cup of coffee. All the folk on the place were in there together now, and took part in the conversation. Andersen explained that his master, Aronsen, had sent him up to see how things were at the mines, if there was any sign of beginning work there again soon. Heaven knows, maybe Andersen sat there lying all the time, about being sent by his master. He might just as well have hit on it for his own account, and anyway, he couldn't have been at the mines at all the little time he'd been away. 'Tis none so easy to see from outside if they're going to start work again, said Isak. No, Andersen admitted that was so, but Aronsen had sent him, and, after all, two pairs of eyes could see better than one. But here Inger seemingly could contain herself no longer. She asked, "Is it true what they're saying? Aronsen is going to sell his place again?" Andersen answers, "He's thinking of it, and a man like him can surely do as he likes, seeing all the means and riches he's got." "Oh, is he so rich then?" "Ay," says Andersen, nodding his head. "Rich enough, and that's a true word." Again Inger cannot keep silence, but asks, right out, "I wonder now, what he'd be asking for the place." Isak puts in a word here. Like as not, he's more curious to know than Inger herself, but it must not seem that the idea of buying Storborg is any thought of his. He makes himself a stranger to it, and says now, "Why, what do you want to know for, Inger?" "I was but asking," says she, and both of them look at Andersen, waiting. And he answers cautiously enough that as to the price he can say nothing of that, but he knows what Aronsen says the place has cost him. "And how much is that?" asks Inger, having no strength to keep her peace and be silent. "'Tis 1600 kroner," says Andersen. Ho! And Inger claps her hands at once to hear it, and if there is one thing womenfolk have no sense nor thought of, 'tis the price of land and properties. But anyway, 1600 kroner is no small sum for folk in the wilds, and Inger has but one fear, that Isak may be frightened off the deal. But Isak, he sits there just exactly like a field, and says only, "Ay, it's the big houses he's put up." "Ay," says Andersen again, "'tis just that. 'Tis the fine big houses and all." Just when Andersen is making ready to go, Leopoldine slips out by the door. A strange thing, but somehow she cannot bring herself to think of shaking hands with him. So she has found a good place, standing in the new cowshed, looking out of a window, and with a blue silk ribbon round her neck that she hadn't been wearing before, and a wonder she ever found time to put it on now. There he goes, a trifle short and stout, spry on his feet, with a light full beard, 8 or 10 years older than herself. Ay, none so bad looking, to her mind. And then the party came back from church late on Sunday night. All had gone well. Little Rebecca had slept the last few hours of the way up, and was lifted from the cart and carried indoors without waking. Sivert has heard a deal of news, but when his mother asks, "Well, what you've got to tell?" he only says, "Nay, nothing much. Axel, he's got a mowing machine and a harrow." "What's that?" says his father, all interested. "Did you see them?" "Ay, I saw them right enough, down on the quay." "Ho, so that was what he must go into town for," says his father. And Sivert sits there swelling with pride at knowing better, but never says a word. His father might just as well believe that Axel's pressing business in the town had been to buy machines. His mother too might think so, for all that. Ho, but there was neither of them thought so in their hearts. They had heard whispers enough of what was the matter, and a new child murder case in the wilds. "Time for bed," says his father at last. Sivert goes off to bed, swelling with knowledge. Axel had been summoned for examination. 'Twas a big affair. The Lensmand had gone with him. so big indeed that the Lensmand's lady, who had just had another child, had left the baby and was gone into town with her husband. She had promised to put in a word to the jury herself. Gossip and scandal all abroad in the village now, and Sivert saw well enough that a certain earlier crime of the same sort was being called to mind again. Outside the church, the groups would stop talking as he came up, and had he not been the man he was, perhaps some would have turned away from him. Good to be Sivert those days, a man from a big place to begin with, son of a wealthy landowner, and then beside, to be known as a clever fellow, a good worker. He ranked before others, and was looked up to for himself. Sivert had always been well liked among folk. If only Jensine did not learn too much before they got home that day. And Sivert had his own affairs to think of. Ay, folk in the wilds can blush and pale as well as other. He had seen Jensine as she left the church with little Rebecca. She had seen him too, but went by. He waited a bit, and then drove over to the smith's to fetch them. They were sitting at table, all the family at dinner. Sivert is asked to join them, but he has had his dinner, thanks. They knew he would be coming, they might have waited that bit of a while for him. So they would have done at Sellanraa, but not here, it seemed. "Nay, 'tis not what you're used to, I dare say," says the smith's wife, and "What news from church?" says the smith, for all he had been at church himself. When Jensine and little Rebecca were seated up in the cart again, says the smith's wife to her daughter, "Well, goodbye, Jensine. We'll be wanting you home again soon." And that could be taken two ways, thought Sivert, but he said nothing. If the speech had been more direct, more plain and outspoken, he might perhaps. He waits with puckered brows, but no more is said. They drive up homeward, and little Rebecca is the only one with a word to say. She is full of the wonder of going to church, the priest in his dress with a silver cross, and the lights and the organ music. After a long while, Jensine says, "'Tis a shameful thing about Barbro and all." "What did your mother mean about you coming home soon?" asked Sivert. "What she meant? Ay, you thinking of leaving us then? Why, they'll be wanting me home some time, I doubt," says she. "Ptro!" says Sivert, stopping his horse. "Like me to drive back with you now, perhaps?" Jensine looks at him, he is pale as death. "No," says she, and a little after she begins to cry. Rebecca looks in surprise from one to the other. Oh, but little Rebecca was a good one to have on a journey like that. She took Jensine's part and patted her and made her smile again. And when little Rebecca looked threateningly at her brother and said she was going to jump down and find a big stick to beat him, Sivert had to smile too. "But what did you mean now, I'd like to know?" says Jensine. Sivert answered straight out at once. "I meant if you don't care to stay with us, why, we must manage without." And a long while after, said Jensine, "Well, there's Leopoldine, she's big now, and fit and all to do my work, seems. Ay, 'twas a sorrowful journey." End of chapter 6. Book 2, Chapter 7 of Growth of the Soil by Knut Hamsun. Translated by W. Worcester. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7. A man walks up the way through the hills. Wind and rain. The autumn downpour has begun, but the man cares little for that. He looks glad at heart, and glad he is. 'Tis Axel Ström, coming back from the town and the court and all. They have let him go free. Ay, a happy man. First of all, there's a mowing machine and a harrow for him down at the quay. And more than that, he's free, and not guilty. Had taken no part in the killing of a child. Ay, so things can turn out. But the times he had been through. Standing there as a witness, this toiler in the fields had known the hardest days of his life. 'Twas no gain to him to make Barbro's guilt seem greater, and for that reason he was careful not to say too much. He did not even say all he knew. Every word had to be dragged out of him, and he answered mostly with but yes and no. Was it not enough? Was he to make more of it than there was already? Oh, but there were times when it looked serious indeed. There were the men of law, black-robed and dangerous. Easy enough for them, it seemed, just with a word or so, to turn the whole thing as they pleased, and have him sentenced. But they were kindly folk after all, and did not try to bring him to destruction. Also, as it happened, there were powerful influences at work trying to save Barbro, and it was all to his advantage as well. Then what on earth was there for him to trouble about? Barbro herself would hardly try to make things look worse than need be for her former master and lover. He knew terrible things about this and an earlier affair of the same sort. She could not be such a fool. No, Barbro was clever enough. She said a good word for Axel, and declared that he had known nothing of her having borne a child till after it was all over. He was different in some ways, perhaps, from other men, and they did not always get on well together, but a quiet man and a good man in every way. No, it was true he had dug a new grave and buried the body away there. But that was long after, and by reason he had thought the first place was not dry enough, though indeed it was, and 'twas only Axel's odd way of thinking. What need, then, for Axel to fear at all when Barbro took all the blame on herself that way? And as for Barbro herself, there were mighty influences at work. Fru Lensmand Heyerdahl had taken up the case. She went about, to high and low, never sparing herself, demanded to be called as a witness, and made a speech in court. When her turn came, she stood there before them all, and was a great lady indeed. She took up the question of infanticide in all its aspects, and gave the court a long harangue on the subject. It almost seemed as if she had obtained permission beforehand to say what she pleased. Ay, folk might say what they would of Fru Lensmand Heyerdahl, but make a speech, that she could, and was learned in politics and social questions, no doubt about that. 'Twas a marvel where she found all her words. Now and again the presiding justice seemed wishful to keep her to the point, but maybe he had not the heart to interrupt, and let her run on. And at the end of it all, she volunteered one or two useful items of information, and made a startling offer to the court. Leaving out all legal technicalities, what took place was this. "We women," said Fru Heyerdahl, "are an unfortunate and oppressed moiety of humanity. It is the men who make the laws, and we women have not a word to say in the matter. But can any man put himself in the position of a woman in childbirth? Has he ever felt the dread of it, ever known the terrible pangs, ever cried aloud in the anguish of that hour? In the present instance, it is a servant girl who has borne the child, a girl unmarried, and consequently trying all through the critical time to hide her condition. And why must she seek to hide it? Because of society. Society despises the unmarried woman who bears a child. Not only does society offer her no protection, but it persecutes her, pursues her with contempt and disgrace. Atrocious! No human creature with any heart at all could help feeling indignant at such a state of things. Not only is the girl to bring a child into the world, a thing in itself surely hard enough, but she is to be treated as a criminal for that very fact. I will venture to say that it was well for the unfortunate girl now accused before the court that her child was born by accident when she fell into the water and drowned. Well for herself and for the child. As long as society maintains its present attitude, an unmarried mother should be counted guiltless even if she does kill her child." Here a slight murmur was heard from the presiding justice. "Or, at any rate, her punishment should be merely nominal," said Fru Heyerdahl. "We are all agreed, of course," she went on, "that infant life should be preserved. But is that to mean that no law of simple humanity is to apply to the unfortunate mother? Think, consider what she has been through during all the period of pregnancy, what suffering she has endured in striving to hide her condition, and all the time never knowing where to turn for herself and the child when it comes. No man can imagine it, said she. The child is at least killed in kindness. The mother tries to save herself and the child she loves from the misery of its life. The shame is more than she can bear, and so the plan gradually forms itself in her mind to put the child out of the way. The birth takes place in secret, and the mother is for 24 hours in such a delirious state that at the moment of killing the child she is simply not responsible for her actions. Practically speaking, she has not herself committed the act at all, being out of her senses at the time. With every bone in her body aching still after her delivery, she has to take the little creature's life and hide away the body. Think what an effort of will is demanded here. Naturally, we all wish all children to live. We are distressed at the thought that any should be exterminated in such a way. But it is the fault of society that it is so. The fault of a hopeless, merciless, scandal-mongering, mischievous, and evil-minded society, ever on the watch to crush an unmarried mother by every means in its power. But, even after such treatment at the hands of society, the persecuted mother can rise up again. It often happens that these girls, after one false step of the sort, are led by the very fact to develop their best and noblest qualities. Let the court inquire of the superintendents at refuge homes, where unmarried mothers and their children are received, if this is not the case. And experience has shown that it is just such girls whom society has forced to kill their own children, that make the best nurses. Surely that was a matter for any and all to think seriously about. Then there is another side of the question. Why is the man to go free? The mother found guilty of infanticide is thrust into prison and tortured, but the father, the seducer, he is never touched. Yet being as he is the cause of the child's existence, he is a party to the crime. His share in it, indeed, is greater than the mother's. Had it not been for him, there would have been no crime. Then why should he be acquitted? Because the laws are made by men. There is the answer. The enormity of such man-made laws cries of itself to heaven for intervention. And there can be no help for us women till we are allowed a say in the elections and in the making of laws ourselves. But, said Fru Heyerdahl, if this is the terrible fate that is meted out to the guilty, or, let us say, the more clearly guilty, unmarried mother who has killed her child, what of the innocent one, who is merely suspected of the crime, but has not committed it? What reparation does society offer to her? None at all. I can testify that I know the girl here accused, have known her since she was a child. She has been in my service, and her father is my husband's assistant. We women venture to think and feel directly in opposition to men's accusations and persecution. We dare to have our own opinion. The girl there has been arrested, deprived of her liberty, on suspicion of having in the first place concealed the birth of a child, and further of having killed the child so born. I have no doubt in my own mind that she is not guilty of either. The court itself will arrive at this self-evident conclusion. Concealment of birth. The child was born in the middle of the day. True, the mother is alone at the time, but who could have been with her in any case? The place is far away in the wilds. The only living soul within reach is a man. How could she send for a man at such a moment? Any woman will tell you it is impossible, not to be thought of. And then it is alleged that she must have killed the child after. But the child was born in the water. The mother falls down in an icy stream, and the child is born. What was she doing by the water? She is a servant girl, a slave, that is to say, and has her daily work to do. She is going to fetch juniper twigs for cleaning, and crossing the stream, she slips and falls in, and there she lies, The child is born, and is drowned in the water." Fru Heyerdahl stopped. She could see from the look of the court and the spectators that she had spoken wonderfully well. There was a great silence in the place. Only Barbro sat dabbing her eyes now and again for sheer emotion. And Fru Heyerdahl closed with these words: "We women have some heart, some feeling. I have left my own children in the care of strangers to travel all this way and appear as a witness on behalf of the unfortunate girl sitting there. Men's laws cannot prevent women from thinking, and I think this, that the girl there has been punished sufficiently for no crime. Acquit her, let her go free, and I will take charge of her myself. She will make the best nurse I have ever had." And Fru Heyerdahl stepped down. Says the justice then: "But I think you said a moment ago that the best nurses were those who had killed their children." Oh, but the justice was not of a mind to go against Fru Heyerdahl, not in the least. He was as humane as could be himself, a man as gentle as a priest. When the advocate for the Crown put a few questions to the witness afterwards, the justice sat for the most part making notes on some papers. The proceedings lasted only till a little after noon. There were few witnesses, and the case was clear enough. Axel Ström sat hoping for the best. Then suddenly it seemed as if the advocate for the Crown and Fru Heyerdahl were joining forces to make things awkward for him, because he had buried the body instead of notifying the death. He was cross-examined somewhat sharply on this point, and would likely enough have come out badly if he had not all at once caught sight of Geissler sitting in the court. Ay, 'twas right enough, Geissler was there. This gave Axel courage. He no longer felt himself alone against the law that was determined to beat him down, and Geissler nodded to him. Ay, Geissler was come to town. He had not asked to be called as a witness, but he was there. He had also spent a couple of days before the case came on in going into the matter himself, and noting down what he remembered of Axel's own account given to him at Maaneland. Most of the documents seemed to Geissler somewhat unsatisfactory. Lensmand Heyerdahl was evidently a narrow-minded person, who had throughout endeavoured to prove complicity on Axel's part. Fool, idiot of a man, what did he know of life in the wilds, when he could see that the child was just what Axel had counted on to keep the woman, his helpmeet, on the place? Geissler spoke to the advocate for the Crown, but it seemed there was little need of intervention there. He wanted to help Axel back to his farm and his land, but Axel was in no need of help, from the looks of things. For the case was going well, as Barbro herself was concerned, and if she were acquitted, then there could be no question of any complicity at all. It would depend on the testimony of the witnesses. When the few witnesses had been heard, Oline had not been summoned, but only the Lensmand, Axel himself, the experts, a couple of girls from the village. When they had been heard, it was time to adjourn for the midday break, and Geissler went up to the advocate for the Crown once more. The advocate was of opinion that all was going well for the girl Barbro, and so much the better. Fru Lensmand Heyerdahl's words had carried great weight. All depended now upon the finding of the court. "Are you at all interested in the girl?" asked the advocate. "Why, to a certain extent," answered Geissler. "Or rather, perhaps in the man. Has she been in your service too?" "No, he's never been in my service. I was speaking of the girl. It's she that has the sympathy of the court. No, she's never been in my service at all. The man, he doesn't seem to come out of it so well," said the advocate. "Goes off and buries the body all by himself in the wood. Looks bad, very bad." "He wanted to have it buried properly, I suppose," said Geissler. "It hadn't been really buried at all at first." "Well, of course a woman hadn't the strength of a man to go digging, and in her state she must have been done up already. Altogether," said the advocate, "I think we've come to take a more humane view of these infanticide cases generally, of late. If I were to judge, I should never venture to condemn the girl at all, but from what has appeared in this case, I shall not venture to demand a conviction." "Very pleased to hear it," said Geisler, with a bow. The advocate went on. As a man, as a private person, I will even go further and say, I would never condemn a single unmarried mother for killing her child. Most interesting, said Geisler, to find the advocate for the crown so entirely in agreement with what Fru Heyerdahl said before the court. Oh, Fru Heyerdahl! Still, to my mind, there was a great deal in what she said. After all, what is the good of all these convictions? Unmarried mothers have suffered enough beforehand, and been brought so low in every human regard by the brutal and callous attitude of the world. The punishment ought to suffice. Geisler rose and said at last, No doubt. But what about the children? True, said the advocate. It's a sad business about the children. Still, all things considered, perhaps it's just as well. Illegitimate children have a hard time, and turn out badly as often as not. Geisler felt perhaps some touch of malice at the portly complacency of the man of law. He said, Erasmus was born out of wedlock. Erasmus? Erasmus of Rotterdam. And Leonardo the same. Leonardo da Vinci? Really? Well, of course, there are exceptions. Otherwise there would be no rule. But on the whole... We pass protective measures for beast and bird, said Geisler. Seems rather strange, doesn't it, not to trouble about our own young? The advocate for the crown reached out slowly and with dignity after some papers on the table, as a hint that he had not time to continue the discussion. Yes, he said absently. Yes, no doubt. Geisler expressed his thanks for a most instructive conversation and took his leave. He sat down in the courthouse again, to be there in good time. He was not ill-pleased, maybe, to feel his power. He had knowledge of a certain piece of wrapping, a man's shirt cut across, to carry, let us say twigs, for a broom, of the body of a child floating in the harbour at Bergen. Ay, he could make matters awkward for the court if he chose. A word from him would be as effective as 1,000 swords. But Geisler had doubtless no intention of uttering that word now unless it were needed. Things were going splendidly without. Even the advocate for the crown had declared himself on the side of the accused. The room fills, and the court is sitting again. An interesting comedy to watch in a little town. The warning gravity of the advocate for the crown, the emotional eloquence of the advocate for the defense. The court sat listening to what appeared to be its duty in regard to the case of a girl named Barbro, and the death of her child. For all that, it was no light matter after all to decide. The advocate for the crown was a presentable man to look at, and doubtless also a man of heart, but something appeared to have annoyed him recently, or possibly he had suddenly remembered that he held a certain office in the state, and was bound to act from that point of view. An incomprehensible thing, but he was plainly less disposed to be lenient now than he had been during the morning. If the crime had been committed, he said, it was a serious matter, and things would look black indeed if they could with certainty be declared so black as would appear from the testimony of the witnesses already heard. That was a matter for the court to decide. He wished to draw attention to 3 points. Firstly, whether they had before them a concealment of birth, whether this was clear to the court. He made some personal remarks on this head. The second point was the wrapping, the piece of a shirt. Why had the accused taken this with her? Was it in order to make use of it for a certain purpose preconceived? He developed this suggestion further. His third point was the hurried and suspicious burial, without any notification of the death to either priest or lensman. Here, the man was the person chiefly responsible, and it was of the utmost importance that the court should come to the right conclusion in that respect. For it was obvious that if the man were an accomplice, and had therefore undertaken the burial himself, then his servant girl must have committed a crime before he could be an accomplice to it. From someone in court. Axel Ström felt himself again in danger. He looked up without meeting a single glance. All eyes were fixed on the advocate speaking. But far down in the court sat Geissler again, looking highly supercilious, as if bursting with his own superiority, his under lip thrust forward, his face turned towards the ceiling. This enormous indifference to the solemnity of the court, and that uttered loudly and without concealment, cheered Axel mightily. He felt himself no longer alone against the world. And now things took a turn again for the better. This advocate for the crown seemed at last to think he had done enough, had achieved all that was possible in the way of directing suspicion and ill feeling towards the man, and now he stopped. He did more. He almost, as it were, faced round and made no demand for a conviction. He ended by saying, in so many words, and after the testimony of the witnesses in the case, he on his part did not call upon the court to convict the accused. This was well enough, thought Axel. The business was practically over. Then came the turn of the advocate for the defence, a young man who had studied the law, and had now been entrusted with this most satisfactory case. His tone itself showed the view he took of it. Never had a man been more certain of defending an innocent person than he. Truth to tell, this Fru Heyerdahl had taken the wind out of his sails beforehand, and used several of his own intended arguments that morning. He was annoyed at her having already exploited the society theme. Oh, but he could have said some first-rate things about society himself. He was incensed at the mistaken leniency of the presiding justice in not stopping her speech. It was a defence in itself, a brief prepared beforehand, and what was there left for him? He began at the beginning of the life story of the girl Barbro. Her people were not well off, albeit industrious and respectable. She had gone out to service at an early age, first of all to the Lensmann's. The court had heard that morning what her mistress, Fru Heyerdahl, thought of her. No one could wish for a finer recommendation. Barbro had then gone to Bergen. Here the advocate laid great stress on a most feelingly written testimonial from two young businessmen in whose employ Barbro had been while at Bergen. Evidently in a position of trust. Barbro had come back to act as housekeeper for this unmarried man in an outlying district, and here her trouble began. She found herself with child by this man. The learned counsel for the prosecution had already referred, in the most delicate and considerate manner, be it said, to the question of concealment of birth. Had Barbro attempted to conceal her condition? Had she denied being with child? The two witnesses, girls from her own village, had been of opinion that she was in that condition, and when they had asked her, she had not denied it at all. She had merely passed the matter off. What would a young girl naturally do in such a case but pass it off? No one else had asked her about it at all. Go to the mistress and confess? She had no mistress. She was mistress on the place herself. She had a master, certainly, but a girl could not be expected to confide in a man upon such a matter. She bears her cross herself, does not sing, does not whisper, but is silent as a Trappist. Concealment? No, but she kept herself to herself. The child is born, a sound and healthy boy, had lived and breathed after birth, but had been suffocated. The court had been made aware of the circumstances attending this birth. It had taken place in the water. The mother falls into the stream, and the child is born, but she is incapable of saving the child. She lies there, unable even to rise herself till some time after. No marks of violence were to be seen upon the body. There was nothing to indicate that it had been intentionally killed. It had been drowned by misadventure at birth, that was all. The most natural explanation in the world. His learned colleague had made some mention of a cloth or wrapping, considering it something of a mystery why she should have taken half a shirt with her that day. The mystery was clear enough. She had taken the shirt to carry stripped juniper in. She might have taken, let us say, a pillow-case. As it was, she had taken this piece of a shirt. Something she must have, in any case. She could not carry the stuff back in her hands. No, there was surely no ground for making a mystery of this. One point, however, was not quite so clear. Had the accused been treated with the care and consideration which her condition at the time demanded? Had her master dealt kindly with her? It would be as well for him if it were found so. The girl herself had, under cross-examination, referred to the man in satisfactory terms, and this again was evidence in itself of her own nobility of character. The man, on his part, Axel Ström, had likewise in his depositions refrained from any attempt to add to the burden of the girl, or to blame her in any way. In this he had acted rightly, not to say wisely, seeing that his own case depended very largely upon how matters went with her. By laying the blame on her he would, if she were convicted, bring about his own downfall. It was impossible to consider the documents and depositions in the present case without feeling the deepest sympathy for this young girl in her forsaken situation. And yet there was no need to appeal to mercy on her behalf, only to justice and human understanding. She and her master were in a way betrothed, but a certain dissimilarity of temperament and interests prevented them from marrying. The girl could not entrust her future to such a man. It was not a pleasant subject, but it might be well to return for a moment to the question of the wrapping that had been spoken of before. It should here be noted that the girl had taken not one of her own undergarments, but one of her master's shirts. The question at once arose, had the man himself offered the material for the purpose? Here, one was at first inclined to see a possibility, at any rate, that the man, Axel, had had some part in the affair. From some one in court, loud and hard. So much so indeed that the speaker paused, and all looked round to see who might be responsible for the interruption. The presiding justice frowned. But, went on the advocate for the defense, collecting himself again, in this respect, also, we can set our minds to rest, thanks to the accused herself. It might seem well to her advantage to divide and blame here, but she had not attempted to do so. She had entirely, and without reserve, absolved Axel Ström from any complicity whatever in the fact of her having taken his shirt instead of something of her own on her way to the water, that is, on her way to the woods to gather juniper. There was not the slightest reason for doubting the asseveration of the accused on this point. Her depositions had throughout been found in accordance with the facts, and the same was evidently the case in this. Had the shirt been given her by the man, this would have been to presuppose a killing of the child already planned. The accused, truthful as she was, had not attempted to charge even this man with a crime that had never been committed. Her demeanor throughout had been commendably frank and open. She had made no endeavor to throw blame on others. There were frequent instances before the court of this delicacy of feeling on the part of the accused, as, for instance, the fact that she had wrapped up the body of the child as well as she could, and put it away decently, as the Lensmand had found it. Here the presiding justice interposed, merely as a matter of form, observing that it was grave number 2, which the Lensmand had found, the grave in which Axel had buried the body after its removal from the first. "True, that is true, I stand corrected," said the advocate, with all proper respect for the president of the court. Perfectly true, but Axel had himself stated that he had only carried the body from one grave and laid it in the other, and there could be no doubt but that a woman was better able to wrap up a child than was a man, and who best of all? Surely a mother's tender hand. The presiding justice nods. In any case, could not this girl, if she had been of another sort, have buried the child naked? One might even go so far as to say that she might have thrown it into a dust-bin. She might have left it out under a tree in the open to freeze to death, that is to say, of course, if it had not been dead already. She might have put it in the oven when left alone and burnt it up. She might have taken it up to the river at Salonra and thrown it in there. But this mother did none of those things. She wrapped the dead child neatly in a cloth and buried it. And if the body had been found wrapped neatly when the grave was opened, it must be a woman and not a man who had so wrapped it. And now, the advocate for the defense went on, it lay with the court to determine what measure of guilt could properly be attributed to the girl Barbro in the matter. There was but little remaining for which she could be blamed at all. Indeed, in his, counsel's opinion, there was nothing. Unless the court found reason to convict on the charge of having failed to notify the death. But here, again, the child was dead, and nothing could alter that. The place was far out in the wilds, many miles from either priest or Lensmand. Natural enough, surely, to let it sleep the eternal sleep in a neat grave in the woods. And if it were a crime to have buried it thus, then the accused was not more guilty than the father of the child. As it was, the misdemeanor was surely slight enough to be overlooked. Modern practice was growing more and more disposed to lay more stress on reforming the criminal than on punishing the crime. It was an antiquated system which sought to inflict punishment for every mortal thing. It was the lex talionis of the Old Testament, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. There was no longer the spirit of the law in modern times. The law of the present day was more humane, seeking to adjust itself according to the degree of criminal intent and purpose displayed in each case. No, the court could never convict this girl. It was not the object of a trial to secure an addition to the number of criminals, but rather to restore to society a good and useful member. It should be noted that the accused had now the prospect of a new position where she would be under the best possible supervision. Fru Lensmand Heyerdahl had, from her intimate knowledge of the girl, and from her own valuable experience as mother, thrown wide the doors of her own home to the girl. The court would bear in mind the weight of responsibility attaching to its decision here, and would then convict or acquit the accused. Finally, he wished to express his thanks to the learned counsel for the prosecution, who had generously refrained from demanding a conviction, a pleasing evidence of deep and humane understanding. The advocate for the defense sat down. The remainder of the proceedings did not take long. The summing up was but a repetition of the same points, as viewed from opposite sides, a brief synopsis of the action of the play, dull, dry, and dignified. It had all been managed very satisfactorily all around. Both the advocates had pointed out what the court should consider, and the presiding justice found his task easy enough. Lights were lit, a couple of lamps hanging from the ceiling. A miserable light it was. The justice could hardly see to read his notes. He mentioned with some severity the point that the child's death had not been duly notified to the proper authorities, but that, under the circumstances, should be considered rather the duty of the father than of the mother, owing to her weakness at the time. The court had then to determine whether any case had been proved with regard to the concealment of birth and infanticide. Here the evidence was again recapitulated from beginning to end. Then came the usual injunction as to being duly conscious of responsibility, which the court had heard before, and finally, the not uncommon reminder that in cases of doubt the scale should be allowed to turn in favor of the accused. And now all was clear and ready. The judges left the room and went into another apartment. They were to consider a paper with certain questions, which one of them had with him. They were away 5 minutes, and returned with a no to all the questions. No, the girl Barbro had not killed her child. Then the presiding judge said a few more words, and declared that the girl Barbro was now free. The courthouse emptied. The comedy was over. Someone takes Axel Ström by the arm. It is Geissler. Said he. So you're done with that now? Aye, said Axel. But they've wasted a lot of your time to no purpose. Aye, said Axel again. But he was coming to himself again gradually, and after a moment he added, None the less, I'm glad it was no worse. No worse, said Geisler. I'd have liked to see them try. He spoke with emphasis, and Axel fancied Geisler must have had something to do with the case himself, that he had intervened. Heaven knows if, after all, it had not been Geisler himself that had led the whole proceedings and gained the result he wished. It was a mystery, anyway. So much at least Axel understood, that Geisler had been on his side all through. "I've a deal to thank you for," said he, offering his hand. "What for?" asked Geisler. "Why, for all this." Geisler turned it off shortly. "I've done nothing at all, didn't trouble to do anything, 'twasn't worth while." But for all that, Geisler was not displeased, maybe, at being thanked. It was as if he had been waiting for it, and now it had come. "I've no time to stand talking now," he said. "Going back tomorrow, are you? Good. Good-bye then, and good luck to you." And Geisler strolled off across the street. On the boat going home, Axel encountered the Lensmand and his wife, Barbro, and the two girls called as witnesses. "Well," said Fru Heyerdahl, "aren't you glad it turned out so well?" Axel said yes. He was glad it had come out all right in the end. The Lensmand himself put in a word and said, "This is the second of these cases I've had while I've been here. First with Inger from Sellanraa, and now this. No, it's no good trying to countenance that sort of thing. Justice must take its course." But Fru Heyerdahl guessed, no doubt, that Axel was not overpleased with her speech of the day before, and tried to smooth it over, to make up for it somehow now. "You understand, of course, why I had to say all that about you yesterday." Yes," said Axel. "You understand, of course, I know. You didn't think I wanted to make things harder for you in any way. I've always thought well of you, and I don't mind saying so." "Ay," said Axel, no more. But he was pleased and touched at her words. "Yes, I mean it," said Fru Heyerdahl. "But I was obliged to try and shift the blame a little your way, otherwise Barbro would have been convicted, and you too. It was all for the best, indeed it was." "I thank you kindly," said Axel. "And it was I and no other that went about from one to the other through the place, trying to do what I could for you both. And you saw, of course, that we all had to do the same thing, make out that you were partly to blame, so as to get you both off in the end." "Ay," said Axel. "Surely you didn't imagine for a moment that I meant any harm to you, when I've always thought so well of you." Ay, this was good to hear, after all the disgrace of it. Axel, at any rate, was so touched that he felt he must do something, give Fru Heyerdahl something or other, whatever he could find, a piece of meat perhaps, now autumn was come. He had a young bull. Fru Lensmand Heyerdahl kept her word. She took Barbro to live with her. On board the steamer, too, she looked after the girl, and saw that she was not cold nor hungry. Took care, also, that she did not get up to any nonsense with the mate from Bergen. The first time it occurred she said nothing, but simply called Barbro to her. But a little while after there was Barbro with him again, her head on one side, talking Bergen dialect and smiling. Then her mistress called her up and said, "Really, Barbro, you ought not to be going on like that among the men now. Remember what you've just been through, and what you've come from." "I was only talking to him a minute," said Barbro. "I could hear he was from Bergen." Axel did not speak to her. He noticed that she was pale and clear-skinned now, and her teeth were better. She did not wear either of his rings. And now here is Axel tramping up to his own place once more. Wind and rain, but he is glad at heart. A mowing machine and a harrow down at the quay. He had seen them. Oh, that Geisler! Never a word had he said in town about what he had sent. Ay, an unfathomable man was Geisler. End of chapter 7. Book 2, Chapter 8 of Growth of the Soil by Knut Hamsun. translated by W. Worcester. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8. Axel had no time to rest at home, as it turned out. The autumn gales led to fresh trouble and bothersome work that he had brought upon himself. The telegraph apparatus on his wall announced that the line was out of order. Oh, but he had been thinking over much of the money, surely, when he took on that post. It had been a nuisance from the start. Brede Olsen had fairly threatened him when he went down to fetch the apparatus and tools. Had said to him in as many words, "You don't seem like remembering how I saved your life last winter." "'Twas Oline saved my life," answered Axel. "Ho, indeed. And didn't I carry you down myself on my own poor shoulders? Anyway, you were clever enough to buy up my place in summertime and leave me homeless in the winter." Brede was deeply offended. He went on, "But you can take my telegraph for me, all the rubble of it for me. I and mine will go down to the village and start on something there. You don't know what it'll be, but wait and see. What about a hotel place where folk can get coffee? You see, but we'll manage all right. There's my wife can sell things to eat and drink as well as another, and I can go out on business and make a heap more than you ever did. But I don't mind telling you, Axel, I could make things awkward for you in many odd ways. Seeing all I know about the telegraph and things, 'twould be easy enough both to pull down poles and cut lines and all. And then you to go running out after it midway in the busy time. That's all I'll say to you, Axel, and you bear it in mind." Now Axel should have been down and brought up the machines from the quay. All over gilt and colouring they were, like pictures to see. And he might have had them to look at all that day, and learn the manner of using them, but now they must wait. 'Twas none so pleasant to have to put aside all manner of necessary work to run and see after a telegraph line, but 'twas the money. Up on the top of the hill he meets Aronsen, Aronsen the trader, standing there looking and gazing out into the storm, like a vision himself. And what did he want there? No peace in his mind now, it seems. But he must go up to the field himself and look at the mine with his own eyes. And this, look you, Trader Aronsen had done from sheer earnest thought of his own and his family's future. Here he is, face to face with bare desolation on the forsaken hills, machines lying there to rust, carts and material of all sorts left out in the open. 'Twas dismal to see. Here and there on the walls of the huts were placards, notices written by hand, forbidding anyone to damage or remove the company's property, tools, carts, or buildings. Axel stops for a few words with the mad trader, and asks if he has come out shooting. "Shooting? If I could only get within reach of him." "Him? Who then?" "Why, him that's ruining me and all the rest of us hereabout. Him that won't sell his bit of field and let things get to work again, and trade and money passing same as before." "Do you mean him Geissler, then?" "'Tis him I mean. Ought to be shot." Axel laughs at this, and says, "Geissler, he was in town but a few days back. You should have talked to him there. But if I might be so bold as to say, I doubt you'd better leave him alone after all." "And why?" asks Aron angrily. "Why, I've a mind he'd be otherwise and mysterious for you in the end." They argued over this for a while, and Aronsen grew more excited than ever. At last Axel asked, jestingly, "Well, anyway, you'll not be so hard on us all to run away and leave us to ourselves in the wilds?" "Huh! Think I'm going to stay fooling about here in your bogs and never so much as making the price of a pipe?" cried Aron indignantly. "Find me a buyer and I'll sell out." "Sell out?" says Axel. "The land's good ordinary land if she's handled as should be. And what you've got's enough to keep a man." "Haven't I just said I'll not touch it?" cried Aronsen again in the gale. "I can do better than that." Axel thought if that was so, 'twould be easy to find a buyer. But Aronsen laughed scornfully at the idea. There was nobody there in the wilds had money to buy him out. "Not here in the wilds, maybe, but elsewhere." "There's naught but filth and poverty," said Aron bitterly. Why, that's as may be, said Axel in some offence. But Isak up at Sellanraa, he could buy you out any day. Don't believe it, said Aronsen. "'Tis all one to me what you believe, said Axel, and turned to go. Aronsen called after him. Hi, wait a bit. What's that you say? Isak might take the place. Was that what you said? Ay, said Axel. If 'twas only the money, he's means enough to buy up 5 of your Storborg and all. Aronsen had gone round keeping wide of Sellanraa on his way up, taking care not to be seen, but, going back, he called in and had a talk with Isak, but Isak only shook his head and said nay, 'twas a matter he'd never thought of and didn't care to. But when Eleseus came back home that Christmas, Isak was easier to deal with. True, he maintained that it was a mad idea to think of buying Storborg. 'Twas nothing had ever been in his mind. Still, if Eleseus thought he could do anything with the place, why, they might think it over. Eleseus himself was midways between, as it were, not exactly eager for it, yet not altogether indifferent. If he did settle down here at home, then his career in one way was at an end. 'Twas not like being in a town. That autumn, when a lot of people from his parts had been up for cross-examination in a certain place, he had taken care not to show himself. He had no desire to meet any that knew him from that quarter. They belonged to another world. And was he now to go back to that same world himself? His mother was all for buying the place. Sivert, too, said it would be best. They stuck to Eleseus, both of them, and one day the 3 drove down to Storborg to see the wonder with their own eyes. But once there was a prospect of selling, Aronsen became a different man. He wasn't pressed to get rid of it, not at all. If he did go away, the place could stand as it was. 'Twas a first-rate holding, a cash-down place. There'd be no difficulty in selling it any time. You'd not give my price, said Aronsen. They went over the house and stores, the warehouse and sheds, inspected the miserable remains of the stock, consisting of a few mouth-organs, watch-chains, boxes of coloured papers, lamps with hanging ornaments, all utterly unsaleable to sensible folks that lived on their land. There were a few cases of nails and some cotton print, and that was all. Eleseus was constrained to show off a bit, and looked over things with a knowing air. I've no use for that sort of truck, said he. Why then, you've no call to buy it, said Aronsen. Anyhow, I'll offer you 1,500 kroner for the place as it stands, with goods, livestock, and the rest, said Eleseus. Oh, he was careless enough. His offer was but a show, for something to say. And they drove back home. No, there was no deal. Eleseus had made a ridiculous offer that Aronsen regarded as an insult. I don't think much of you, young man, said Aronsen. Ay, calling him young man, considering him but a slip of a lad that had grown conceited in the town, and thought to teach him, Aronsen, the value of goods. I'll not be called young man by you, if you please, said Eleseus, offended in his turn. They must be mortal enemies after that. But how could it be that Aronsen had all along been so independent and so sure of not being forced to sell? There was a reason for it. Aronsen had a little hope at the back of his mind, after all. A meeting had been held in the village to consider the position which had arisen owing to Geissler's refusal to sell his part of the mining tract. 'Twas not only the outlying settlers who stood to lose by this, it would be fatal to the whole district. Why could not people go on living as well or as poorly now as before there had been any mine at all? Well, they could not, and that was all about it. They had grown accustomed to better food, finer bread, store-bought clothes, and higher wages, general extravagance. Ay, folk had learned to reckon with money more, that was the matter. And now the money was gone again, had slipped away like a shoal of herring out to sea. 'Twas dire distress for them all, and what was to be done? There was no doubt about it. Ex-Lensman Geissler was taking his revenge upon the village because they had helped his superior to get him dismissed. Equally clear was it that they had underestimated him at the time. He had not simply disappeared and left. By the simplest means, merely by demanding an unreasonable price for a mine, he had succeeded in checking the entire development of the district. Ay, a strong man. Axel Ström from Monaland could bear them out in this. He was the one who had last met Geissler. Brede's girl Barbro had had a lawsuit in the town, and come home acquitted. But Geissler, he had been there in court all the time. And if anyone suggested that Geissler was dejected and a broken man, why, he had only to look at the costly machines that same Geissler had sent up as a present to Axel Ström. This man it was, then, who held the fate of the district in his hand. They would have to come to some agreement with him. What price would Geissler ultimately be disposed to accept for his mine? They must ascertain in any case. The Swedes had offered him 25,000. Geissler had refused. But suppose the village here, the commune, were to make up the remainder, simply to get things going again. If it were not an altogether unheard of amount, it might be worth while. Both the trader at the shore station and Aronsen up at Storborg would be willing to contribute privately and secretly. Funds devoted to such a purpose now would be repaid in the long run. The end of it was that the two men were deputed to call on Geissler and take up the matter with him, and they were expected back shortly. So it was then that Aronsen cherished a flicker of hope, and thought he could afford to stand on his dignity with any who offered to buy up Storborg, but it was not to last. A week later the deputation returned home with a flat refusal. Oh, they had done the worst thing possible at the outset in choosing Brede Olsen as one of the men they sent. They had taken him as being one who best could spare the time. They had found Geissler, but he had only shaken his head and laughed. Go back home again, he had said. But Geissler had paid for their journey back. Then the district was to be left to its fate. After Aronsen had raged for a while and grown more and more desperate, he went up one day to Sellanraa and closed the deal. Ay, Aronsen did. Eleseus got it for the price he had offered, land and house and sheds, livestock and goods, for 1,500 kroner. True, on going through the inventory after, it was found that Aronsen's wife had converted most of the cotton print to her own use. But trifles of that sort were nothing to a man like Eleseus. It didn't do to be mean, he said. Nevertheless, Eleseus was not exactly delighted with things as they had turned out. His future was settled now. He was to bury himself in the wilds. He must give up his great plans. He was no longer a young gentleman in an office. He would never be a lensmand, not even live in a town at all. To his father and those at home he made it appear he was proud at having secured Storborg at the very price he had fixed. It would show them that he knew what he was about. But that small triumph did not go very far. He had also the satisfaction of taking over Andresen, the chief clerk, who was thus, as it were, included in the bargain. Aronsen had no longer any use for him until he had a new place going. It was a pleasant sensation to be Eleseus when Andresen came up begging to be allowed to stay. Here it was Eleseus who was master and head of the business for the first time in his life. "You can stay, yes," he said. "I shall be wanting an assistant to look after the place when I'm away on business, opening up connections in Bergen and Trondhjem," said he. And Andresen was no bad man to have, as it soon proved. He was a good worker, and looked after things well when Eleseus was away. 'Twas only at first he had been somewhat inclined to show and play the fine gentleman, and that was the fault of his master Aronsen. It was different now. In the spring, when the bogs were thawed some depth, Sivert came down from Sellanraa to Storborg to start a bit of ditching for his brother, and lo, Andresen himself went out on the land digging too. Heaven knows what possessed him to do it, for 'twas no work of his, but that was the sort of man he was. It was not thawed deep enough yet, and they could not get as far as they wanted by a long way, but it was something done, at any rate. It was Isak's old idea to drain the bogs at Storborg and till the land there properly. The bit of store was only to be an extra, a convenience, to save folk going all the way down to the village for a reel of thread. So Sivert and Andresen stood there digging, and talking now and again when they stopped for a rest. Andresen had also somehow or other managed to get hold of a gold piece, a 20-krone piece, and Sivert would gladly have had the bright thing himself. But Andresen would not part with it, kept it wrapped up in tissue paper in his chest. Sivert proposed a wrestling match for the money, see who could throw the other. But Andresen would not risk it. Sivert offered to take 20 kroner in notes against the gold piece, and do all the digging himself into the bargain if he won, but Andresen took offence at that. "Ho," said he, "and you'd like to go back home, no doubt, and say I'm no good at working on the land." At last they agreed to set the 25 kroner in notes against the gold 20-krone piece, and Sivert slipped home to Sellanraa that night to ask his father for the money. A young man's trick, the pretty play of youth. A night's sleep thrown away to walk up miles and miles down again, and work next day as usual. 'Twas nothing to a young man in his strength, and a bright gold piece was worth it all. Andresen was a little inclined to make fun of him over the deal, but Sivert was not at a loss. He had only to let fall a word of Leopoldine. "There, I was nearly forgetting. Leopoldine, she asked after you." And Andresen stopped his work of a sudden and went very red. Pleasant days for them both, draining and ditching, getting up long arguments for fun, and working and arguing again. Now and then Eleseus would come out and lend a hand, but he soon tired. Eleseus was not strong either of body or will, but a thorough good fellow for all that. "Here's that Oline coming along," Sivert the jester would say. "Now you'll have to go in and sell her a paper of coffee." And Eleseus was glad enough to go. Selling Oline some trifle or other meant so many minutes' rest from throwing heavy clods. And Oline, poor creature, she might well be needing a pinch of coffee now and again, whether by chance she managed to get the money from Axel to pay for it, or bartered a goat's milk cheese in exchange. Oline was not altogether what she had been. The work at Monaland was too hard for her. She was an old woman now, and it was leaving its mark. Not that she ever confessed to any weakness or aging herself. Ho! She would have found plenty to say if she had been dismissed. Tough and irrepressible was Oline, did her work, and found time to wander over to neighbours, here or there, for a real good gossip. 'Twas her plain right, and there was little gossiping at Monaland. Axel himself was not given that way. As for the Barbro case, Oline was displeased, ay, disappointed was Oline. Both of them acquitted. That Brede's girl Barbro should be let off when Inger Sellanraa had got 8 years was not to Oline's taste at all. She felt an unchristian annoyance at such favoritism. But the Almighty would look to things, no doubt, in His own good time. And Oline nodded, as if prophesying divine retribution at a later date. Naturally, also, Oline made no secret of her dissatisfaction with the finding of the court, more especially when she happened to fall out with her master, Axel, over any little trifle. She would deliver herself in the old soft-spoken way of much deep and bitter sarcasm. "Ay, 'tis strange how the laws change these days, for all the wickedness of Sodom and Gomorrah. But the word of the Lord's my guide, as ever was, and a blessed refuge for the meek." Oh, Axel was sick and tired of his housekeeper now, and wished her anywhere. And now with spring coming again, and all the season's work to be done, haymaking to come, and what was he to do? 'Twas a poor lookout. His brother's wife at Breidablik had written home to Helgeland, trying to find a decent woman to help him, but nothing had come of it as yet. And in any case, it would mean his having to pay for the journey. Nay, 'Twas a mean and wicked trick of Barbro to make away with a bit of a child and then run off herself. A summer and 2 winters now he had been forced to make do with Oline, and no saying how much longer it might be yet. And Barbro, the creature, did she care? He had had a few words with her down in the village one day that winter, but never a tear had trickled slowly from her eyes to freeze on her cheek. "What you've done with the rings I gave you?" asks he. "Rings?" "Ay, the rings." "I haven't got them now." "Ho, so you haven't got them now?" "'Twas all over between us," said she, "and I couldn't wear them after that. 'Tis not the way to go on wearing rings when it's all over between you. Well, I'd just like to know what you've done with them, that's all." "Wanted me to give them back, maybe," said she. "Well, I never thought you'd have had me put you to that shame." Axel thought for a moment and said, "I could have made it up to you other ways, that you shouldn't lose by it, I mean." But no, Barbro had got rid of the rings, and never so much as gave him the chance of buying back a gold ring and a silver ring at a reasonable price. For all that, Barbro was not so thoroughly harsh and unlovable, that she was not. She had a long apron thing that fastened over her shoulders, and with tucks at the edge, and a strip of white stuff up round her neck. Ay, she looked well. There were some said she'd found a lad already down in the village to go sweethearting with, though maybe 'twas but their talk after all. Fru Heyerdahl kept a watchful eye on her at any rate, and took care not to let her go to the Christmas dances. Ay, Fru Heyerdahl was careful enough, that she was. Here was Axel standing talking to his former servant girl about a matter of 2 rings, and suddenly Fru Heyerdahl comes right between them and says, "Barbro, I thought you were going to the store." Off goes Barbro, and her mistress turns to Axel and says, "Have you come down with some meat or something?" "H'm," said Axel, just that, and touched his cap. Now it was Fru Heyerdahl that had praised him up so that last autumn, saying he was a splendid fellow, and she had always thought well of him. And one good turn was worth another, no doubt. Axel knew the way of doing things; 'twas an old story, when simple folk had dealing with their betters with authority. And he had thought at once of a piece of butcher's meat, a bull he had, that might be useful there. But time went on, and month passed by, and autumn was gone, and the bull was never killed. And what harm could it do, after all, if he kept it for himself? Give it away, and he would be so much poorer. And 'twas a fine beast, anyway. Goddag, nay," said Axel, shaking his head. He'd no meat with him today. But Fru Heyerdahl seemed to be guessing his thoughts, for she said, "I've heard you've an ox, or what?" "Ay, so I have," said Axel. "Are you going to keep it?" "Ay, I'll be keeping him yet." "I see. You've no sheep to be killed?" "Not now I haven't. 'Tis this way. I've never had but what's to be kept on the place." "Oh, I see," said Fru Heyerdahl. Well, that was all. And she went on her way. Axel drove up homeward, but he could not help thinking somewhat of what had passed. He rather feared he had made a false step somehow. The Lensmand's lady had been an important witness once, for and against him, but important anyway. He had been through an unpleasant time on that occasion, but, after all, he had got out of it in the end. Got out of a very awkward business in connection with the body of a child found buried on his land. Perhaps, after all, he had better kill that sheep. And, strangely enough, this thought was somehow connected with Barbro. If he came down bringing sheep for her mistress, it could hardly fail to make a certain impression on Barbro herself. But again the days went on, and nothing evil happened for their going on. Next time he drove down to the village he had no sheep on his cart, no, still no sheep. But at the last moment he had taken a lamb, a big lamb though, not a miserable little one by any means, and he delivered it with these words: "'Tis rare tough meat on a wether, and no sort of a gift to bring, but this is none so bad." But Fru Heyerdahl would not hear of taking it as a gift. "Say what you want for it," she said. Oh, a fine lady! 'Twas not her way to take gifts from folk. And the end of it was that Axel got a good price for his lamb. He saw nothing of Barbro at all. Lensmand's lady had seen him coming and got her out of the way. And good luck go with her. Barbro that had cheated him out of his help for a year and a half. End of chapter 8. Book 2, Chapter 9 of Growth of the Soil by Knut Hamsun. Translated by W. W. Worcester. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. That spring, something unexpected happened. Something of importance indeed. Work at the mine was started again. Geissler had sold his land. Inconceivable. Oh, but Geissler was an unfathomable mind. He could make a bargain or refuse, shake his head for a no, or nod the same for yes, could make the whole village smile again. Conscience had pricked him, maybe. He had no longer the heart to see the district where he had been Lensmand famishing on home-made gruel and short of money. Or had he got his $250,000, possibly again, Geissler himself had at last begun to feel the need of money, and had been forced to sell for what he could get. 25 or 50,000 was not to be despised after all. As a matter of fact, there were rumors that it was his eldest son who had settled the business on his father's account. Be that as it might, work was recommenced. The same engineer came again with his gangs of men, and the work went on anew. The same work, ay, but in a different fashion now, going backwards, as it were. All seemed in regular order. The Swedish mine owners had brought their men, and dynamite and money. What could be wrong anyway? Even Aronsen came back again, Aronsen the trader, who had set his mind on buying back Storborg from Eleseus. "No," said Eleseus, "it's not for sale." "You'll sell, I suppose, if you're offered enough." "No." No, Eleseus was not going to sell Storborg. The truth was, he had changed his mind somewhat as to the position. It was none so bad, after all, to be owner of a trading station in the hills. He had a fine veranda with coloured glass windows, and a chief clerk to do all the work, while he himself went about the country travelling. Ay, travelling first class, with fine folks. One day, perhaps, he might be able to go as far as America. He often thought of that. Even these little journeys on business to the towns down in the south were something to live on for a long time after. Not that he let himself go altogether, and chartered a steamer of his own and held wild orgies on the way. Orgies were not in his line. A strange fellow was Eleseus. He no longer cared about girls, had given up such things altogether, lost all interest in them. No, but after all, he was the Margrave's son, and travelled first class and bought up loads of goods. And each time he came back a little finer than before, a greater man. The last time he even wore galoshes to keep his feet dry. "What's that? You taken to wearing 2 pairs of shoes?" they said. "I've been suffering from chilblains lately," says Eleseus. And every one sympathized with Eleseus and his chilblains. Glorious days, a grand life, with no end of leisure. No, he was not going to sell Storborg. What? Go back to a little town and stand behind the counter in a little shop, and no chief clerk of his own at all. Moreover, he had made up his mind now to develop the business on a grand scale. The Swedes had come back again and would flood the place with money. He would be a fool to sell now. Aronsen was forced to go back each time with a flat refusal, more and more disgusted at his own lack of foresight in ever having given up the place. Oh, but Aronsen might have saved himself a deal of self-reproach and likewise Eleseus with his plans and intentions, that he might have kept in moderation. And more than all, the village would have done well to be less confident, instead of going about smiling and rubbing its hands like angels sure of being blessed. No call for them to do so if they had but known. For now came disappointment, and no little one at that. Who would ever have thought it? Work at the mine commenced again, true enough, but at the other end of the field, 8 miles away, on the southern boundary of Geissler's holding, far off in another district altogether, a district with which they were in no way concerned. And from there the work was to make its way gradually northward to the original mine, Isak's mine, to be a blessing to folk in the wilds and in the village. At best it would take years, any number of years, a generation. The news came like a dynamite charge of the heaviest sort, with shock and stopping of ears. The village folk were overcome with grief. Some blamed Geissler. 'Twas Geissler, that devil of a man, who had tricked them once more. Others huddled together at a meeting and sent out a new deputation of trusty men, this time to the mining company, to the engineer. But nothing came of it. The engineer explained that he was obliged to start work from the south because that was nearest the sea, and saved the need of an aerial railway, reduced the transport almost to nil. No, the work must begin that way, no more to be said. Then it was that Aronsen at once rose up and set out to the new workings, the new promised land. He even tried to get Andresen to go with him. "What's the sense of you staying on here in the wilds?" said he. "Much better come with me." But Andresen would not leave. Incomprehensible, but so it was. There was something which held him to the spot. He seemed to thrive there, had taken root. It must be Andresen who had changed, for the place was the same as ever. Folk and things were unaltered. The mining work had turned away to other tracts, but folk in the wilds had not lost their heads over that. They had their land to till, their crops, their cattle. No great wealth in money, true, but in all the necessaries of life, ay, absolutely all. Even Eleseus was not reduced to misery because the stream of gold was flowing elsewhere. The worst of it was that in his first exaltation he had bought great stocks of goods that were now unsaleable. Well, they could stay there for the time being. It looked well, at any rate, to have plenty of wares in a store. No, a man of the wilds did not lose his head. The air was not less healthy now than before. There were folk enough to admire new clothes. There was no need of diamonds. Wine was a thing he knew from the feast at Cana. A man of the wild was not put out by the thought of great things he could not get. Art, newspapers, luxuries, politics, and such like were worth just what folk were willing to pay for them, no more. Growth of the soil was something different, a thing to be procured at any cost, the only source, the origin of all. A dull and desolate existence, nay, least of all. A man had everything, his powers above, his dreams, his loves, his wealth of superstition. Sivert, walking one evening by the river, stops on a sudden. There on the water are a pair of ducks, male and female. They have sighted him, they are aware of him, and afraid. One of them says something, utters a little sound, a melody in 3 tones, and the other answers with the same. Then they rise, whirl off like 2 little wheels a stone's throw up the river, and settle again. Then, as before, one speaks and the other answers. The same speech as the first, but mark a new delight. It is set 2 octaves higher. Sivert stands looking at the birds, looking past them, far into a dream. A sound had floated through him, a sweetness, and left him standing there with a delicate thin recollection of something wild and splendid, something he had known before and forgotten again. He walks home in silence, says no word of it, makes no boast of it. 'Twas not for worldly speech. And it was but Sivert from Sellanraa went out one evening, young and ordinary as he was, and met with this. It was not the only thing he met with. There were more adventures beside. Another thing which happened was that Jensine left Sellanraa, and that made Sivert not a little perturbed in his mind. Ay, it came to that. Jensine would leave, if you please. She wished it so. Oh, Jensine was not one of your common sort, none could say that. Sivert had once offered to drive her back home at once, and on that occasion she had cried, which was a pity. But afterwards she repented of that, and made it clear that she repented, and gave notice and would leave. Ay, a proper way to do. Nothing could have suited Inger at Sellanraa better than this. Inger was beginning to grow dissatisfied with her maid. Strange, she had nothing to say against her, but the sight of the girl annoyed her. She could hardly endure to have her about the place. It all arose, no doubt, from Inger's state of mind. She had been heavy and religious all that winter, and it would not pass off. "Want to leave, do you? Why then, well and good," said Inger. It was a blessing, the fulfillment of nightly prayers. Two grown women they were already. What did they want with this Jensine, fresh as she could be, and marriageable and all? Inger thought with a certain displeasure of that same marriageableness, thinking, maybe, how she had once been the same herself. Her deep religiousness did not pass off. She was not full of vice. She had tasted, sipped, let us say, but 'twas not her intent to preserve in that way all through her old age, not by any means. Inger turned aside with horror from the thought. The mine and all its workmen were no longer there, and heaven be praised. Virtue was not only tolerable, but inevitable. It was a necessary thing. Ay, a necessary good, a special grace. But the world was all awry. Look now, here was Leopoldine, little Leopoldine, a seedling, a slip of a child, going about bursting with sinful health. But an arm round her waist, and she would fall helpless. Oh, fie! There were spots on her face now too, a sign in itself of wild blood. Ay, her mother remembered well enough, 'twas the wild blood would out. Inger did not condemn her child for a matter of spots on her face, but it must stop. She would have an end of it. And what did that fellow Andresen want coming up to Sellanraa of Sundays, to talk field work with Isak? Did the two menfolk imagine the child was blind? Ay, young folk were young folk, as they had ever been, 30, 40 years ago, but worse than ever now. Why, that's as it may be, said Isak, when they spoke of the matter. But here's the spring come, and Jensine gone, and who's to manage the summer work? Leopoldine and I can do the haymaking, said Inger. Ay, I'd rather go raking night and day myself, said she bitterly, and on the point of crying. Isak could not understand what there was to make such a fuss about, but he had his own ideas, no doubt, and off he went to the edge of the wood, with crowbar and pick, and fell to working at a stone. Nay, indeed, Isak could not see why Jensine had left them. A good girl, and a worker. To tell the truth, Isak was often at a loss in all save the simplest things, his work, his lawful and natural doings. A broad-shouldered man, well filled out, nothing astral about him at all. He ate like a man, and throve on it, and 'twas rarely he was thrown off his balance in any way. Well, here was this stone. There were stones more in plenty, but here was one to begin with. Isak is looking ahead, to the time when he will need to build a little house here, a little home for himself and Inger, as well as to get a bit of work on the site and clear it, while Sivert is down at Storborg. Otherwise, the boy would be asking questions, and that was not to Isak's mind. The day must come, of course, when Sivert would need all there was of the place for himself. The old folks would be wanting a house apart. Ay, there was never an end of building at Sellanraa. That fodder loft above the cowshed was not done yet, though the beams and planks for it were there already. Well then, here was this stone. Nothing so big to look at above ground, but not to be moved at a touch for all that. It must be a heavy fellow. Isak dug round about it, and tried his crowbar, but would not move. He dug again and tried once more, but no. Back to the house for a spade then, and clear the earth away, then digging again, trying again. No. A mighty heavy beast to shift, thought Isak patiently enough. He dug away now for a steady while, but the stone seemed reaching ever deeper and deeper down. There was no getting a purchase on it. A nuisance it would be if he had to blast it, after all. The boring would make such a noise, and call up every one on the place. He dug. Off again to fetch a levering pole, and tried that. No. He dug again. Isak was beginning to be annoyed with this stone. He frowned and looked at the thing, as if he had just come along to make a general inspection of the stones in that neighborhood, and found this one particularly stupid. He criticized it. Ay, it was a round-faced idiotic stone, no getting hold of it any way. He was almost inclined to say it was deformed. Blasting? The thing wasn't worth a charge of powder. And was he to give it up? Was he to consider the possibility of being beaten by a stone? He dug. Hard work, that it was. But as to giving up, at last he got the nose of his lever down and tried it. The stone did not move. Technically speaking, there was nothing wrong with his method, but it did not work. What was the matter then? He had got out stones before in his life. Was he getting old? Funny thing, he. Ridiculous indeed. True, he had noticed lately that he was not so strong as he had been. That is to say, he had noticed nothing of the sort, never heeded it. 'Twas only imagination. And he goes at the stone once more, with the best will in the world. Oh, 'twas no little matter when Isak bore down on a levering pole with all his weight. There he is now, hoisting and hoisting again, a cyclops, enormous, with a torso that seems built in one to the knees. A certain pomp and splendor about him, his equator was astounding. But the stone did not move. No help for it, he must dig again. Try blasting? Not a word. No, dig again. He was intent on his work now. The stone should come up. It would be wrong to say there was anything at all perverse in this on Isak's part. It was the ingrown love of a worker on the soil, but altogether without tenderness. It was a foolish sight, first gathering as it were about the stone from all sides, then making a dash at it, then digging all round its sides and fumbling at it, throwing up the earth with his bare hands, ay, so he did. Yet there was nothing of a caress in it all. Warmth, yes, but the warmth of zeal alone. Try the lever again. He thrust it down where there was the best hold. No. An altogether remarkable instance of obstinacy and defiance on the part of the stone. But it seemed to be giving. Isak tries again, with a touch of hope. The earthbreaker has a feeling now that the stone is no longer invincible. Then the lever slipped, throwing him to the ground. "Devil!" said he. Ay, he said that. His cap had got thrust down over one ear as he fell, making him look like a robber, like a Spaniard. He spat. Here comes Inger. "Isak, come in and have your food now," says she, kindly and pleasant as can be. "Ay," says he, but will have her no nearer, and wants no questions. Oh, but Inger, never dreaming, she comes nearer. "What's in your mind now?" she asks, to soften him with a hint of the way he thinks out some new grand thing almost every day. But Isak is sullen, terribly sullen and stern. He says, "Nay, I don't know." And Inger again, foolish that she is, ugh, keeps on talking and asking and will not go. "Seeing as you've seen it yourself," says he at last, "I'm getting up this stone here." "Ho, going to get him up?" "Ay." "And couldn't I help a bit at all?" she asks. Isak shakes his head, but it was a kindly thought, anyway, that she would have helped him, and he can hardly be harsh in return. "If you just wait the least bit of a while," says he, and runs home for the hammers. If he could only get the stone rough a bit, knocking off a flake or so in the right spot, it would give the lever a better hold. Inger holds the setting hammer, and Isak strikes. Strikes, strikes. Ay, sure enough, off goes a flake. "'Twas a good help," says Isak, "and thanks. But don't trouble about food for me this bit of a while. I must get this stone up first." But Inger does not go, and to tell the truth, Isak is pleased enough to have her there watching him at his work. 'Tis a thing has always pleased him, since their young days, and lo, he gets a fine purchase now on the lever, and puts his weight into it. The stone moves. "He's moving," says Inger. "'Tis but your nonsense," says Isak. "Nonsense indeed, but it is." Got so far, then, and that was something. The stone was, so to speak, converted now, was on his side. They were working together. Isak hoists and heaves with his lever, and the stone moves, but no more. He keeps at it a while, nothing more. All at once he understands that it is not merely a question of weight, the dead pull of his body. No, the fact is that he has no longer his old strength. He has lost the tough agility that makes all the difference. Weight? An easy matter enough to hang on with his weight and break an iron-shod pole. No, he was weakening, that was it. And the patient man is filled with bitterness at the thought. At least he might have been spared the shame of having Inger here to see it. Suddenly he drops the lever and grasps the sledge. A fury takes him. He is minded to go at it violently now. And see, his cap still hangs on one ear, robber fashion. And now he steps mightily, threateningly, round the stone, trying, as it were, to set himself in the proper light. Ho, he will leave that stone a ruin and a wreck of what it had been. Why not? When a man is filled with mortal hatred of a stone, it is mere formality to crush it. And suppose the stone resists, suppose it declines to be crushed, why, let it try, and see which of the two survives. And then it is Inger that speaks up, a little timidly, again, seeing no doubt what is troubling him. What if we both hang on the stick there? And the thing she calls a stick is the lever, nothing else. "No!" cries Isak furiously. But after a moment's thought he says, "Well, well, since you're here, though you might as well have gone home, let's try." And they put the stone up on edge. Ay, they manage that. And "Puh!" says Isak. But now comes a revelation, a strange thing to see. The underside of the stone is flat, mightily broad, finely cut, smooth and even as a floor. The stone is but the half of a stone, the other half is somewhere close by, no doubt. Isak knows well enough that two halves of the same stone may lie in different places. The frost, no doubt, that in course of time had shifted them apart. But he is all wonder and delight at the find. 'Tis a useful stone of the best, a door slab. A round sum of money would not have filled this field worker's mind with such content. A fine door slab, says he proudly. And Inger, simple creature, why, now how on earth could you tell that beforehand? Says Isak, think I'd go here digging about for nothing. They walk home together, Isak enjoying new admiration on false pretences. 'Twas something he had not deserved, but it tasted but little different from the real thing. He lets it be understood that he has been looking out for a suitable door slab for a long time, and had found it at last. After that, of course, there could be nothing in the least suspicious about his working there again. He could root about as much as he pleased on pretext of looking for the other half. And when Sivert came home, he could get him to help. But if it had come to this, that he could no longer go out alone and heave up a stone. Why, things were sorely changed. Ay, 'twas a bad lookout, and the more need to get that site cleared quick as might be. Age was upon him. He was ripening for the chimney corner. The triumph he had stolen in the matter of the door slab faded away in a few days. 'Twas a false thing, and not made to last. Isak stooped a little now in his walk. Had he not once been so much of a man that he grew wakeful and attentive in a moment if one but said a word of stone, a word of digging? And 'twas no long time since, but a few years, no more. Ay, and in those days, folks that were shy of a bit of draining work kept out of his way. Now he was beginning, little by little, to take such matters more calmly. Ja, Herregud. All things were changed. The land itself was different now, with broad telegraph roads up through the woods, that had not been there before, and rocks blasted and sundered up by the water, as they had not been before. And folk, too, were changed. They did not greet coming and going as in the old days, but nodded only, or maybe not even that. But then, in the old days, there had been no Sellanraa, but only a turf hut, while now there had been no Margrave in the old days. Ay, but Margrave, what was he now? A pitiful thing, nothing superhuman, but old and fading, going the way of all flesh. What though he had good bowels, and could eat well when it gave him no strength? 'Twas Sivert had the strength now, and a mercy it was so. But think, if Isak had it too. A sorry thing to find his works running down. He had toiled like a man, carried loads enough for any beast of burden. Now he could exercise his patience in resting. Isak is ill-pleased, heavy at heart. Here lies an old hat, an old sou'wester, rotting on the ground. Carried there by a gale maybe, or maybe the lads had brought it to the edge of the wood years ago, when they were little ones. It lies there year after year, rotting and rotting away. But once it had been a new sou'wester, all yellow and new. Isak remembers the day he came home with it from the store, and Inger had said it was a fine hat. A year or so after, he had taken it to a painter down in the village, and had it blacked and polished, and the brim done in green. And when he came home, Inger thought it a finer hat than before. Inger always thought everything was fine. Ay, 'twas a good life in those days. Inger to look on, his best days. And when March and April came, Inger and he would be wild after each other, just like the birds and beasts in the woods. And when May was come, he would sow his grain and plant potatoes, living and thriving from day to dawn. Work and sleep, loving and dreaming. He was like the first big ox, and that was a wonder to see, big and bright as a king. But there was no such May to the years now, no such thing. Isak was sorely despondent for some days. Dark days they were. He felt neither wish nor strength to start work on the fodder loft. That could be left for Sivert to do some day. The thing to be done now was the house for himself, the last house to build. He could not long hide from Sivert what he was doing. He was clearing the ground, and plain to see what for. And one day he told. "There's a good bit of stone, if we'd any use for stonework," said he. "And there's another." Sivert showed no surprise, and only said, "Ay, first-rate stones." "What you might think," said his father. "We've been digging round here now to find that other door slab piece. Might almost do to build here, I don't know." "Ay, 'tis no bad place to build," said Sivert, looking round. "Think so? 'Twas none so bad, maybe, to have a bit of a place to house folk, if any should come along." "Ay, a couple of rooms 'd be as well. You saw how 'twas when the Swedish gentlemen came, and no proper place to house them. But what you think, a bit of a kitchen as well, maybe, if 'twas any cooking to be done." "Ay, "'Twould be a shame to build with never a bit of a kitchen," says Sivert. "You think so?" Sivert said no more, but Sivert he was a fine lad to grasp things, and get into his head all at once just what was needed in a place to put up Swedish gentlemen that chanced to come along. Never so much as asked a single question, but only said: "Doing it my way now, you'd put up a bit of a shed on the north wall. Folks coming along would be useful to have a shed place to hang up wet clothes and things." And his father agrees at once. Ay, the very thing. They work at their stones again in silence. Then asks Isak, "Eleseus, he's not come home, I suppose?" And Sivert answers evasively, "You'll be coming home soon." 'Twas that way with Eleseus. He was all for staying away, living away on journeys. Couldn't he have written for the goods? But he must go round and buy them on the spot. Got them so much cheaper. Ay, maybe. But what about cost of the journey? He had his own way of thinking, it seemed. And then, what did he want anyway, with more cotton stuff, and coloured ribbons for christening caps, and black and white straw hats, and long tobacco pipes? No one ever bought such things up in the hills, and the village folk, they only came up to Storborg when they'd no money. Eleseus was clever enough in his way, only to see him write on a paper, or do sums with a bit of chalk. "Ay, with a head like yours," said the folk, admiring him. And that was true enough, but he was spending overmuch. The village folk never paid their owings, and yet even a fellow like Brede Olsen could come up to Storborg that winter and get cotton print and coffee and molasses and paraffin on credit. Isak has laid out a deal of money already for Eleseus, and his store and his long journeyings about. There's not overmuch left now out of the riches from the mine, and what then? "How do you think he's getting on, Eleseus?" asked Isak suddenly. "Getting on?" says Sivert to gain time. "Doesn't seem to be doing so well." He says it'll go all right." "You spoken to him about it?" "Nay, but Anderson says so." Isak thought over this and shook his head. "Nay, I doubt it's going ill," says he. "'Tis a pity for the lad." And Isak gloomier than ever now, for all he'd been none too bright before. But then Sivert flashes out a bit of news. "There's more folk coming to live now." "How do you say?" "2 new holdings. They've bought up close by us." Isak stands still with his crowbar in hand. This was news, and good news, the best that could be. "That makes 10 of us here," says he. And Isak learns exactly where the new men have bought. He knows the country all round, in his head, and nods. Ay, they've done well there. Wood for firing in plenty, and some big timber here and there. Ground slopes down southwest. Ay. Settlers, nothing could beat them anyway. Here were new folk coming to live. The mine had come to nothing, but so much the better for the land. A desert, a dying place, far from it. All about was swarming with life. 2 new men, 4 new hands to work, fields and meadows and homes. Oh, the little green tracts and a forest, a hut and water, children and cattle about. Corn waving on the moorlands where naught but horsetail grew before, bluebells nodding on the fells, and yellow sunlight blazing in the lady-slipper flowers outside a house, and human beings living there, move and talk and think, and are there with heaven and earth. Here stands the first of them all, the first man in the wilds. He came that way, knee-deep in marsh growth and heather, found a sunny slope and settled there. Others came after him, they trod a path across the waste Almenning. Others again, and the path became a road. Carts drove there now. Isak may be content, may start with a little thrill of pride. He was the founder of a district, the pioneer. "Look here, we can't go wasting time on this bit of a house place if we're to get that fodder loft done this year," says he. With a new brightness, new spirit, as it were, new courage, and life. End of chapter 9. Book 2, Chapter 10 of Growth of the Soil by Knut Hamsun. Translated by W. Worster. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 10. A woman tramping up along the road. A steady summer rain falls, wetting her, but she does not heed it. Other things are in her mind. Anxiety. Barbro it is, and no other. Brede's girl, Barbro. Anxious, aye, not knowing how the venture will end. She has gone from service at the Lensmann's, and left the village. That is the matter. She keeps away from all the farms on the road up, unwilling to meet with folk, easy to see where she was going, with a bundle of clothing on her back. Ay, going to Monaland, to take service there again. 10 months she has been at the Lensmann's now, and 'tis no little time, reckoned out in days and nights, but an eternity reckoned in longing and oppression. It had been bearable at first, Fru Heyerdahl looking after her kindly, giving her aprons and neat things to wear. 'Twas a joy to be sent on errands to the store with such fine clothes to wear. Barbro had been in the village as a child. She knew all the village folk from the days when she had played there, gone to school there, kissed the lads there, and joined in many games with stones and shells. Bearable enough for a month or so. But then Fru Heyerdahl had begun to be even more careful about her, and when the Christmas festivities began, she was strict. And what good could ever come of that? It was bound to spoil things. Barbro could never have endured it, but that she had certain hours of the night to herself. From 2 to 6 in the morning she was more or less safe, and had stolen pleasures, not a few. What about cook, then, for not reporting her? A nice sort of woman she must be. Oh, an ordinary woman enough, as the world finds them. Cook went out without leave herself. They took it in turns. And it was quite a long time before they were found out. Barbro was by no means so depraved that it showed in her face. Impossible to accuse her of immorality. Immorality? She made all the resistance one could expect. When young men asked her to go to a Christmas dance, she said no once, and no twice. But the third time she would say, "I'll try to come from 2 to 6. Just as a decent woman should, not trying to make herself out worse than she is, and making a display of daring. She was a servant girl, serving all her time, and knew no other recreation than fooling with men. It was all she asked for. Fru Heyerdahl came and lectured her, lent her books, and a fool for her pains. Barbro had lived in Bergen and read the papers and been to the theatre. She was no innocent lamb from the countryside. But Fru Heyerdahl must have grown suspicious at last. One day she comes up at 3 in the morning to the maid's room and calls, "Barbro." "Yes," answers cook. "It's Barbro I want. Isn't she there? Open the door." Cook opens the door and explains as agreed upon that Barbro had had to run home for a minute about something. Home for a minute at this time of night? Fru Heyerdahl has a good deal to say about that, and in the morning there is a scene. Brede is sent for, and Fru Heyerdahl asks, "Was Barbro at home with you last night, at 3 o'clock?" Brede is unprepared, but answers, "3 o'clock? Yes, quite right. We sat up late, there was something we had to talk about," says Brede. The Lensmann's lady then solemnly declares that Barbro shall go out no more at nights. "No, no," says Brede. "Not as long as she's in this house." "No, no, there, you can see Barbro, I told you so," says her father. "You can go and see your parents now and then during the day," says her mistress. But Fru Heyerdahl was wide awake enough, and her suspicion was not gone. She waited a week, and tried at 4 in the morning. "Barbro," she called. Oh, but this time was cook's turn out, and Barbro was at home. The maid's room was a nest of innocence. Her mistress had to hit on something in a hurry. "Did you take in the washing last night?" "Yes." "That's a good thing. It's blowing so hard. Good night." But it was not so pleasant for Fru Heyerdahl to get her husband to wake her in the middle of the night and go padding across herself to the servants' room to see if they were at home. They could do as they pleased, she would trouble herself no more. And if it had not been for sheer ill luck, Barbro might have stayed the year out in her place that way. But a few days ago the trouble had come. It was in the kitchen, early one morning. Barbro had been having some words with cook, and no light words either. They raised their voices, forgetting all about their mistress. Cook was a mean thing and a cheat. She had sneaked off last night, out of her turn, because it was Sunday. And what excuse had she to give? Going to say goodbye to her favorite sister that was off to America? Not a bit of it. Cook had made no excuse at all, but simply said that Sunday night was one had been owing to her for a long time. "Oh, you've not an atom of truth nor decency in your body," said Barbro. And there was the mistress in the doorway. She had come out, perhaps, with no more thought than that the girls were making too much noise, but now she stood looking very closely at Barbro's apron over her breast. Ay, leaning forward and looking very closely indeed. It was a painful moment. And suddenly Fru Heyerdahl screams and draws back to the door. What on earth can it be, thinks Barbro, and looks down at herself. Herregud, a flea, nothing more. Barbro cannot help smiling, and being not unused to acting under critical circumstances, she flicks off the flea at once. "On the floor!" cried Fru Heyerdahl. "Are you mad, girl? Pick it up at once." Barbro begins looking about for it, and once more acts with presence of mind. She makes as if she had caught the creature, and drops it realistically into the fire. "Where did you get it?" asks her mistress angrily. "Where I got it?" "Yes, that's what I want to know." But here Barbro makes a bad mistake. At the store, she ought to have said, of course. That would have been quite enough. As it was, she did not know where she had got the creature, but had an idea it must have been from cook. Cook at the height of passion at once. "From me? You'll please to keep your fleas to yourself, so there." "Anyway, 'twas you was out last night." Another mistake. She should have said nothing about it. Cook has no longer any reason for keeping silence, and now she let out the whole thing, and told all about the nights Barbro had been out. Fru Heyerdahl mightily indignant. She cares nothing about cook. 'Tis Barbro she is after, the girl whose character she has answered for. And even then all might have been well if Barbro had bowed her head like a reed, and been cast down with shame, and promised all manner of things for the future. But no. Her mistress is forced to remind her of all she has done for her, and at that, if you please, Barbro falls to answering back. Ay, so foolish was she, saying impertinent things. Or perhaps she was cleverer than might seem, trying on purpose, maybe, to bring the matter to a head, and get out of the place altogether. Says her mistress, "After I've saved you from the clutches of the law." "As for that," answers Barbro, "I'd have just as pleased if you hadn't." "And that's all the thanks I get," says her mistress. "Least said the better, perhaps," says Barbro. "I wouldn't have got more than a month or two anyway, and done with it." Fru Heyerdahl is speechless for a moment. Ay, for a little while she stands saying nothing, only opening and closing her mouth. The first thing she says is to tell the girl to go. She will have no more of her. "Just as you please," says Barbro. For some days after that, Barbro had been at home with her parents. But she could not go on staying there. True, her mother sold coffee, and there came a deal of folk to the house, but Barbro could not live on like that. And maybe she had other reasons of her own for wanting to get into a settled position again. And so today she had taken a sack of clothes on her back and started up along the road over the moors. Question now whether Axel Ström would take her. But she had had the banns put up anyway, the Sunday before. Raining and dirty underfoot, but Barbro tramps on. Evening is drawing on, but not yet dark at that season of the year. Poor Barbro. She does not spare herself, but goes on her errand like another. She is bound for a place, to commence another struggle there. She has never spared herself, to tell the truth, never been of a lazy sort, but that is why she has her neat figure now and pretty shape. Barbro is quick to learn things, and often to her own undoing. What else could one expect? She had learned to save herself at a pinch, to slip from one scrape to another, but keeping all along some better qualities. A child's death is nothing to her, but she can give sweets to a child alive. Then she has a fine musical ear, can strum softly and correctly on a guitar, singing hoarsely the while, pleasant and slightly mournful to hear. Spared herself? No, so little indeed, that she has thrown herself away altogether, and felt no loss. Now and again she cries, and breaks her heart over this or that in her life, but that is only natural, it goes with the song she sings. 'Tis the poetry and friendly sweetness in her. She had fooled herself and many another with the same. Had she been able to bring the guitar with her this evening, she could have strummed a little for Axel when she came. She manages so as to arrive late in the evening. All is quiet at Monaland when she reaches there. See, Axel has already begun haymaking. The grass is cut near the house, and some of the hay already in. And then she reckons out that Oline, being old, will be asleep in the little room, and Axel lying out in the hayshed, just as she herself had done. She goes to the door she knows so well, breathless as a thief, and calls softly, "Axel." "What's that?" asks Axel all at once. "Nay, 'tis only me," says Barbro, and steps in. "You couldn't house me for the night," she says. Axel looks at her and is slow to think, and sits there in his underclothes, staring at her. "So 'tis you," says he. "And where'll you be going?" "Why, depends first of all if you've need of help to the summer work," says she. Axel thinks over that, and says, "Aren't you going to say where you were then?" "Nay, I've finished at the Lensmand's." "I might be needing help, true enough, for the summer," said Axel. "But what's it mean, anyway, you wanting to come back?" "Nay, never mind me," says Barbro, putting it off. "I'll go on again tomorrow. Go to Sellanraa and cross the hills. I've a place there." "You've fixed up with some one there?" "Ay." "I might be needing summer help myself," says Axel again. Barbro is wet through. She has other clothes in her sack, and must change. "Don't mind about me," says Axel, and moves a bit toward the door, no more. Barbro takes off her wet clothes, they talking the while, and Axel turning his head pretty often towards her. "Now you'd better go out just a bit," says she. "Out?" says he. And indeed, 'twas no weather to go out in. He stands there, seeing her more and more stripped. 'Tis hard to keep his eyes away. And Barbro is so thoughtless. She might well have put on dry things bit by bit as she took off the wet, but no. Her shift is thin and clings to her. She unfastens a button at one shoulder and turns aside. 'Tis nothing new for her. Axel dead silent then, and he sees how she makes but a touch or two with her hands, and washes the last of her clothes from her. 'Twas splendidly done, to his mind. And there she stands, so utterly thoughtless of her. A while after, They lay talking together. Ay, he had need of help for the summer, no doubt about that. They said something that way, says Barbro. He had begun his mowing and haymaking all alone again. Barbro could judge for herself how awkward it was for him now. Ay, Barbro understood. On the other hand, it was Barbro herself that had run away and left him before, without a soul to help him, he can't forget that, and taken her rings with her into the bargain. And on top of all that, shameful as it was, the paper that kept on coming, that Bergen newspaper, it seemed he would never get rid of. He had had to go on paying for it a whole year after. "'Twas shameful mean of them," says Barbro, taking his part all the time. But seeing her all submissive and gentle, Axel himself could not be altogether heartless towards her. He agreed that Barbro might have some reason to be angry with him in return for the way he had taken the telegraph business from her father. "But as for that," said he, "your father can have the telegraph business again for me. I'll have no more of it. 'Tis but a waste of time." "Ay," says Barbro. Axel thought for a while, then asked, straight out, "Well, how about it? Would you want to come for the summer, and no more?" "Nay," says Barbro, "let it be as you please." "You mean that, and truly?" "Ay, just as you please, and I'll be pleased with the same. You've no call to doubt about me any more." "No, 'tis true. And I've ordered about the banns." This was not so bad. Axel lay thinking it over a long time. If she meant it in earnest this time, and not shameful deceit again, then he'd a woman of his own and help for as long as might be. "I could get a woman to come from our parts," said he. "And she's written that she'd come. But then I'd have to pay her fare from America." Says Barbro, "Oh, she's in America then?" "Ay, went over last year she did, and doesn't care to stay." "Never mind about her," says Barbro. "And what'd become of me then?" says she, and begins to be soft and mournful. "No, that's why I've not fixed up all certain with her." And after that, Barbro must have something to show in return. She confessed about how she could have taken a lad in Bergen, and he was a carter in a big brewery, a mighty big concern, and a good position. "And he'll be sorrowing for me now, I doubt," says Barbro, and makes a little sob. "But you know how 'tis, Axel. When there's two been so much together as you and I, 'tis more than I could ever forget, and you can forget me as much as you please." "What, me?" says Axel. "Nay, no need to lie there crying for that, my girl, for I've never forgot you." "Well." Barbro feels a deal better after that confession, and says, "Anyway, paying her fare all the way from America when there's no need." She advises him to have nothing to do with that business. 'Twould be over costly, and there was no need. Barbro seemed resolved to build up his happiness herself. They came to agreement all round in the course of the night. 'Twas not as if they were strangers, they had talked over everything before. Even the necessary marriage ceremony was to take place before St. Olaf's Day and harvest. They had no need to hide things, and Barbro was now herself most eager to get it done at once. Axel was not any put out at her eagerness, and it did not make him any way suspicious, far from it. He was flattered and encouraged to find her so. Ay, he was a worker in the fields, no doubt, a thick-skinned fellow, not used to looking over fine at things, nothing delicate beyond measure. There were things he was obliged to do, and he looked to what was useful first of all. Moreover, here was Barbro all new and pretty again, and nice to him, almost sweeter than before. Like an apple she was, and he bit at it. The banns were already put up. As to the dead child and the trial, neither said a word of that, but they did speak of Oline, of how they were to get rid of her. "Ay, she must go," said Barbro. "We've nothing to thank her for anyway. She's naught but tale-bearing and malice. But it proved no easy matter to get Oline to go. The very first morning when Barbro appeared, Oline was clear no doubt as to her fate. She was troubled at once, but tried not to show it, and brought out a chair. They had managed up to then at Monaland. Axel had carried water and wood and done the heaviest work, and Oline doing the rest. And gradually she had come to reckon on staying the rest of her life on the place. Now came Barbro, and upset it all. "If we'd only a grain of coffee in the house, you should have it," she said to Barbro. "Going farther up, maybe?" "No," said Barbro. "Oh, not going farther?" "No." "Why, 'tis no business of mine, no," says Oline. "Going down again, maybe?" "No, nor going down again. I'm staying here for now." "Staying here, are you?" "Ay, staying here, I doubt." Oline waits a moment, using her old head, full of policy. "Ay, well," says she, "'twill save me then, no doubt, and glad I'll be for the same." "Oh ho," says Barbro in jest. "Has Axel been so hard on you this while?" "Hard on me, Axel? Oh, there's no call to turn an old body's words, there's naught but living on and waiting for the blessed end. Axel that's been as a father and a messenger from the highest to me, day and hour together, and gospel truth the same. But seeing I've none of my own folks here, and living alone and rejected under a stranger's roof, with all my kin over across the hills." But for all that, Oline stayed on. They could not get rid of her till after they were wed, and Oline made a deal of reluctance, but said yes, at last, and would stay so long to please them, and look to house and cattle, while they went down to the church. It took 2 days. But when they came back, wedded and all, Oline stayed on as before. She put off going. One day she was feeling poorly, she said. The next it looked like rain. She made up to Barbro with smooth words about the food. Oh, there was a mighty difference in the food now at Monaland. 'Twas different living now, and a mighty difference in the coffee now. Oh, she stopped at nothing, that Oline. Asked Barbro's advice on things she knew better herself. "What do you think now? Should I milk cows as they stand in their place and order, or should I take cow borderland first?" "You can do as you please." "Ay, 'tis as I always said," exclaims Oline. "You've been out in the world and lived among great folks and fine folks, and learned all and everything. 'Tis different with the likes of me." Ay, Oline stopped at nothing. She was intriguing all day long. Sitting there telling Barbro how she herself was friends and on the best of terms with Barbro's father, with Brede Olsen. Ho, many a pleasant hour they'd had together, and a kindly man, and rich and grand to boot, was Brede, and never a hard word in his mouth. But this could not go on for ever. Neither Axel nor Barbro cared to have Oline there any longer, and Barbro had taken over all her work. Oline made no complaint, but she flashed dangerous glances at her young mistress, and changed her tone ever so little. "Ay, great folk, 'tis true. Axel he was in town a while last harvest time. You didn't meet him there, maybe? Nay, that's true, you were in Bergen that time. But he went into town, he did. 'Twas all to buy a mowing machine and a harrow machine. And what's folk at Sellanraa now beside you here? Nothing to compare." She was beginning to shoot out little pinpricks, but even that did not help her now. Neither of them feared her. Axel told her straight out one day that she must go. "Go?" says Oline. "And how? Crawling belike?" No, she would not go, saying by way of excuse that she was poorly and could not move her legs. And to make things bad as could be, when once they had taken the work off her hands, and she had nothing to do at all, she collapsed, and was thoroughly ill. She kept about for a week in spite of it, Axel looking furiously at her, but she stayed on from sheer malice, and at last she had to take to her bed. And now she lay there, not in the least awaiting her blessed end, but counting the hours till she should be up and about again. She asked for a doctor, a piece of extravagance unheard of in the wilds. "Doctor," said Axel, "are you out of your senses?" "How do you mean, then?" said Oline quite gently, as to something she could not understand. Ay, so gentle and smooth-tongued was she, so glad to think she need not be a burden to others, she could pay for the doctor herself. "Oh, can you?" said Axel. "Why, and couldn't I then?" says Oline. "And anyway, you'd not have me lie here and die like a dumb beast in the face of the Lord." Here Barbro put in a word, and was unwise enough to say: "Well, what you've got to complain of, I'd like to know, when I bring you in your meals and all myself. As for coffee, I've said you're better without it, and meaning well." "Is that Barbro?" says Oline, turning just her eyes and no more to look for her. Ay, she is poorly, is Oline, and a pitiful sight with her eyes screwed round corner ways. "Ay, maybe 'tis as you say, Barbro. If a tiny drop of coffee do me any harm, a spoonful and no more." "If 'twas me in your stead, I'd be thinking of other things than coffee at this hour," says Barbro. "Ay, 'tis as I say," answers Oline. "'Twas never your way to wish and desire a fellow creature's end, but rather they should be converted and live. What? Ay, I'm lying here and seeing things. Is it with child you are now, Barbro?" "What's that you say?" cries Barbro furiously, and goes on again. "Oh, 'twould serve you right if I took and heaved you out on the muck heap for your wicked tongue." And at that the invalid was silent for one thoughtful moment, her mouth trembling as if trying so hard to smile, but dare not. "I heard some one calling last night," says she. "She's out of her senses," says Axel, whispering. "Nay, out of my senses, that I'm not. Like some one calling it was, from the woods, or maybe from the stream up yonder. Strange to hear. As it might be a bit of a child crying out. Was that Barbro went out?" "Ay," says Axel. "Sick of your nonsense, and no wonder." "Nonsense, you call it, and out of my senses and all?" "Ah, but not so far as you'd like to think," says Oline. "Nay, 'tis not the Almighty's will and decree I should come before the throne and before the Lamb as yet, with all I know of goings on here at Maaneland. I'll be up and about again, never fear, and you'd better be fetching a doctor, Axel, 'tis quicker that way. What about that cow you were going to give me?" "Cow? What cow?" "The cow you promised me. Was it Borderland, maybe?" "You're talking wild," says Axel. "You know you promised me a cow the day I saved your life." "Nay, that I never knew." At that Oline lifts up her head and looks at him. Grey and bald she is, a head standing up on a long scraggy neck, ugly as a witch, as an ogress out of a story. And Axel starts at the sight, and fumbles with a hand behind his back for the latch of the door. "Ho," says Oline, "so you're that sort. Ay, well, say no more of it now. I can live without the cow from this day forth, and never a word I'll say or breathe of it again. But well that you've shown what sort and manner of man you are this day. I know it now. Ay, and I'll know it another time." But Oline, she died that night, sometime in the night. Anyway, she was cold next morning when they came in. Oline, an aged creature, born and died. 'Twas no sorrow to Axel nor Barbro to bury her, and be quit of her for ever. There was less to be on their guard against now, they could be at rest. Barbro is having trouble with her teeth again, save for that all is well. but that everlasting woolen muffler over her face, and shifting it aside every time there's a word to say. 'Twas plaguey and troublesome enough, and all this toothache is something of a mystery to Axel. He has noticed, certainly, that she chews her food in a careful sort of way, but there's not a tooth missing in her head. "Didn't you get new teeth?" he says. "Ay, so I did." "And are they aching too?" "Ah, you and your nonsense," says Barbro irritably, for all that Axel has asked innocently enough. And in her bitterness she lets out what is the matter. "You can see how 'tis with me, surely." How 'twas with her. Axel looks closer, and fancies she is stouter than need be. "Why, you can't be. 'Tis surely not another child again," says he. "Why, you know it is," says she. Axel stares foolishly at her. Slow of thought as he is, he sits there counting for a bit. 1 week, 2 weeks, getting on the 3rd week. "Nay, how I should know," says he. But Barbro is losing all patience with this debate, and bursts out, crying aloud, crying like a deeply injured creature. "Nay, you can take and bury me too in the ground, and then you'll be rid of me." Strange, what odd things a woman can find to cry for. Axel had never thought of burying her in the ground. He is a thick-skinned fellow, looking mainly to what is useful. A pathway carpeted with flowers is beyond his needs. "Then you'll not be fit to work in the fields this summer," says he. "Not work?" says Barbro, all terrified again. And then, strange what odd things a woman can find to smile for. Axel, taking it that way, sent a flow of hysterical joy through Barbro, and she burst out, "I'll work for 2. Oh, you wait and see, Axel. I'll do all you set me to, and more beyond. Wear myself to the bone I will, and be thankful, if you'll only put up with me so." More tears and smiles and tenderness after that. Only the two of them in the wilds, none to disturb them. Open doors and a humming of flies in the summer heat. All so tender and willing was Barbro. Ay, he might do as he pleased with her, and she was willing. After sunset he stands harnessing up to the mowing machine. There's a bit he can still get done, ready for tomorrow. Barbro comes hurrying out, as if she's something important, and says, "Axel, how could you ever think of getting one home from America? She couldn't get here before winter, and what use of her then?" And that was something had just come into her head, and she must come running out with it, as if 'twas something needful. But 'twas no way needful. Axel had seen from the first that taking Barbro would mean getting help for all the year. No swaying and swinging with Axel, no thinking with his head among the stars. Now he's a woman of his own to look after the place, he can keep on the telegraph business for a bit. 'Tis a deal of money in the year, and good to reckon with as long as he's barely enough for his needs from the land, and little to sell. All sound and working well, all good reality, and little to fear from Brede about the telegraph line, seeing he's son-in-law to Brede now. Ay, things are looking well, looking grand, with Axel now. End of chapter 10. Book 2, Chapter 11 of Growth of the Soil by Knut Hamsun, translated by W. W. Worster. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. And time goes on. Winter is past. Spring comes again. Isak has to go down to the village one day. And why not? What for? "Nay, I don't know," says he. But he gets the cart cleaned up all fine, puts in the seat and drives off. And a deal of victuals and such put in too. And why not? 'Twas for Eleseus at Storborg. Never a horse went out from Sellanraa, but there was something taken down to Eleseus. When Isak came driving down over the moors, 'twas no little event, for he came but rarely, Sivert going most ways in his stead. At the two farms nearest down, folk stand at the door of the huts and tell one another, "'Tis Isak himself, and what'll he be going down after today?" And, coming down as far as to Monaland, there's Barbro at the glass window with a child in her arms, and sees him, and says, "'Tis Isak himself." He comes to Storborg and pulls up. "Is Eleseus at home?" Eleseus comes out. Ay, he's at home, and not gone yet. Not gone yet, but just going, off on his spring tour of the towns down south. "Here's some things your mother sent down," says his father. "Don't know what it is, but nothing much, I doubt." Eleseus takes the things, and thanks him, and asks, "There wasn't a letter, I suppose, or anything that sort?" "Ay," says his father, feeling in pockets. "There was. 'Tis from little Rebecca, I think they said." Eleseus takes the letter. 'Tis that he has been waiting for, feels it all nice and thick, and says to his father, "Well, 'twas lucky you came in time, though 'tis 2 days before I'm off yet. If you'd like to stay a bit, you might take my trunk down." Isak gets down and ties up his horse, and goes for a stroll over the ground. Little Andresen is no bad worker on the land in Eleseus' service. True, he has had Sivert from Sellanraa with horses, but he has done a deal of work on his own account, draining bogs, and hiring a man himself to set the ditches with stone. No need of buying fodder at Storborg that year, and next, like as not, Eleseus would be keeping a horse of his own, thanks to Andresen and the way he worked on the land. After a bit of a while, Eleseus calls down that he's ready with his trunk, ready to go himself too, by the look of it, in a fine blue suit, white collar, galoshes, and a walking stick. True, he will have 2 days to wait for the boat, but no matter. He may just as well stay down in the village, 'tis all the same if he's here or there. And father and son drive off. Andresen watches them from the door of the shop and wishes a pleasant journey. Isak is all thought for his boy, and would give him the seat to himself, but Eleseus will have none of that, and sits up by his side. They come to Breidablik, and suddenly Eleseus has forgotten something. "What is it?" asks his father. Oh, his umbrella. Eleseus has forgotten his umbrella, but he can't explain all about it, and only says, "Never mind, drive on." "Don't you want to turn back?" "No, drive on." But a nuisance it was. How on earth had he come to leave it? 'Twas all in a hurry, through his father being there waiting. Well, now he had better buy a new umbrella at Trondhjem when he got there. 'Twas no importance either way if he had one umbrella or two. But for all that, Eleseus is out of humour with himself, so much so that he jumps down and walks behind. They could hardly talk much on the way down after that, seeing Isak had to turn round every time and speak over his shoulder. Says Isak, "How long you're going to be away?" And Eleseus answers, "Oh, say 3 weeks perhaps, or a month at the outside." His father marvels how folk don't get lost in the big towns, and never find their way back. But Eleseus answers, as to that, he's used to living in towns, and never get lost, never had done in his life. Isak thinks it a shame to be sitting up there all alone, and calls out, "Here, you come and drive a bit, I'm getting tired." Eleseus won't hear of his father getting down, and gets up beside him again. But first they must have something to eat, out of Isak's well-filled pack. Then they drive on again. They come to the two holdings farthest down. Easy to see they are nearing the village now. Both the houses have white curtains in the little window facing toward the road, and a flagpole stuck up on top of the hayloft for Constitution Day. "'Tis Isak himself," said folk on the two new farms as the cart went by. At last Eleseus gives over thinking of his own affairs and his own precious self enough to ask, "What are you driving down for today?" "Says his father. "'Twas nothing much today." But then, after all, Eleseus was going away. No harm, perhaps, in telling him. "'Tis blacksmith's girl Jensine I'm going down for," says his father. Ay, he admits so much. "And you're going down yourself for that? Couldn't Sivert have gone?" says Eleseus. Ay, Eleseus knew no better, nothing better than to think Sivert would go down to the smith's to fetch Jensine, after she had thought so much of herself as to leave Sellanraa. No, 'twas all awry with the haymaking the year before. Inger had put in all she could, as she had promised. Leopoldine did her share too, not to speak of having a machine for a horse to rake. But the hay was much of it heavy stuff, and the fields were big. Sellanraa was a sizable place now, and the women had other things to look to besides making hay. All the cattle to look to, and meals to be got, and all in proper time. Butter and cheese to make, and clothes to wash, and baking of bread. Mother and daughter working all they could. Isak was not going to have another summer like that. He decided without any fuss that Jensine should come back again if she could be got. Inger, too, had no longer a word against it. She had come to her senses again, and said, "Ay, do as you think best." Ay, Inger was grown reasonable now. 'Tis no little thing to come to one's senses again after a spell. Inger was no longer full of heat that must out, no longer full of wild blood to be kept in check. The winter had cooled her. Nothing beyond the needful warmth in her now. She was getting stouter, growing fine and stately. A wonderful woman to keep from fading, keep from dying off by degrees. Like enough, because she had bloomed so late in life. Who can say how things come about? Nothing comes from a single cause, but from many. Was Inger not in the best repute with the smith's wife? What could any smith's wife say against her? With her disfigurement, she had been cheated of her spring, and later had been set in artificial air to lose 6 years of her summer. With life still in her, what wonder her autumn gave an errant growth. Inger was better than blacksmiths' wives, a little damaged, a little warped, but good by nature, clever by nature, ay. Father and son drove down. They come to Brede Olsen's lodging house and set the horse in a shed. It is evening now, they go in themselves. Brede Olsen has rented the house, an outbuilding it had been, belonging to the storekeeper, but done up now with 2 sitting rooms and 2 bedrooms, none so bad, and in a good situation. The place is well frequented by coffee drinkers and folk from round about the village going by the boat. Brede seems to have been in luck for once, found something suited to him, and he may thank his wife for that. 'Twas Brede's wife had hit on the idea of a coffee shop and lodging house, the day she set selling coffee at the auction at Breidablik. 'Twas a pleasant enough thing to be selling something, to feel money in her fingers, ready cash. Since they had come down here, they had managed nicely, selling coffee in earnest now, and housing a deal of folk with nowhere else to lay their heads. A blessing to travellers is Brede's wife. She has a good helper, of course, in Katrine, her daughter, a big girl now, and clever at waiting. Though that is only for the time, of course. Not long before little Katrine must have something better than waiting on folk in her parents' house. But for the present, they are making money fairly well, and that is the main thing. The start had been decidedly favourable, and might have been better if the storekeeper had not run short of cakes and sweet biscuits to serve with the coffee. Here were all the feast day folk, calling for cakes with their coffee, biscuits and cakes. 'Twas a lesson to the storekeeper, to lay in a good supply another time. The family, and Brede himself, live as best they can on their takings. A good many meals are nothing but coffee and stale cakes left over, but it keeps them alive, and gives the children a delicate, sort of refined appearance. 'Tis not every one has cakes with their coffee, say the village folk. Ay, Bredes are doing well, it seems. They even managed to keep a dog, that goes round begging among the customers and gets bits here and there and grows fat on it. A good fat dog about the place is a mighty fine advertisement for a lodging-house. It speaks for good feeding anywhere. Brede, then, is husband and father in the house, and apart from that position, has got on variously beside. He has been once more installed as Lensmand's assistant and deputy, and had a good deal to do with that way for a time. Unfortunately, his daughter Barbro had fallen out with the Lensmand's wife last autumn about a trifling matter, a mere nothing, indeed, to tell the truth, a flea, and Brede himself is somewhat in disfavour there since. But Brede counts it no great loss after all. There are other families that find work for him now on purpose to annoy the Lensmands. He is frequently called upon, for instance, to drive for the doctor, and as for the parsonage, they'd gladly send for Brede every time there's a pig to be killed, and more. Brede says so himself. But for all that, there are hard times now and again in Brede's house. 'Tis not all the family are as fat and flourishing as the dog. Still, heaven be praised, Brede is not a man to take things much to heart. Here's the children growing up day by day, says he, though, for that matter, there's always new little ones coming to take their place. The ones that are grown up and out in the world can keep themselves, and send home a bit now and again. There's Barbro, married at Monaland, and Helga, out at the herring fishery. They send home something in money, or money's worth, as often as they can. Ay, even Katrine, doing waiting at home, managed, strangely enough, to slip a 5 krone note into her father's hand last winter, when things were looking extra bad. There's a girl for you, said Brede, and never asked her where she'd got the money, or what for. Ay, that was the way. Children with a heart to think of their parents and help them in time of need. Brede is not altogether pleased with his boy Helga in that respect. He can be heard at times standing in the store with a little group about him, developing his theories as to children and their duty toward their parents. Look you now, my boy Helga, if he smokes tobacco a bit, or takes a dram now and then, I've nothing against that. We've all been young in our time. But 'tis not right of him to go sending one letter home after another, and nothing but words and wishes in. 'Tis not right to set his mother crying. 'Tis the wrong road for a lad. In days gone by, things were different. Children were no sooner grown than they went into service and started sending home a little to help. And quite right, too. Isn't it their father and mother had borne them under their breast first of all, and sweating blood to keep the life in them all their tender years, and then to forget it all? It almost seemed as if Helga had heard that speech of his father's, for there came a letter from him after, with money in, 50 kroner, no less. And then Brede's had a great time. Ay, in their endless extravagance, they bought both meat and fish for dinner, and a lamp all hung about with lustres to hang from the ceiling in the best room. They managed somehow, and what more could they ask? Bredes they keep alive, lived from hand to mouth, but without great fear. What more could they wish for? Here's visitors indeed, says Brede, showing Isak and Eleseus into the room with the new lamp. And I'd never thought to see. Isak, you're never going away yourself and all. Nay, only to the smith's for something, 'tis no more. Oh, 'tis Eleseus then, going off south again. Eleseus is used to hotels. He makes himself at home, hangs up his coat and stick on the wall, and calls for coffee. As for something to eat, his father has things in a basket. Katrine brings the coffee. Pay, I'll not hear of it, says Brede. I've had many a bite and sup at Sellanraa, and as for Eleseus, I'm in his books already. Don't take it, Katrine. But Eleseus pays all the same. Takes out his purse and pays out the money, and 20 ore over. No nonsense about him. Isak goes across to the smith's, and Eleseus stays where he is. He says a few words, as in duty bound, to Katrine, but no more than is needed. He would rather talk to her father. No, Eleseus cares nothing for women, has been frightened off by them once, as it were, and takes no interest in them now. Like as not, he'd never much inclination that way to speak of, seeing he's so completely out of it all now. A strange man to live in the wilds, a gentleman with thin writer's hands, and the sense of a woman for finery, for sticks and umbrellas and galoshes. Frightened off and changed, incomprehensibly not a marrying man. Even his upper lip declines to put forth any brutal degree of growth. Yet, it might be the lad had started well enough, come of good stock, and been turned thereafter into an artificial atmosphere, and warped, transformed. Had he worked so hard in an office, in a shop, that his whole originality was lost thereby? Ay, maybe 'twas so. Anyway, here he is now, easy and passionless, a little weak, a little heedless, wandering farther and farther off the road. He might envy every soul among his fellows in the wilds, but has not even strength for that. Katrine is used to jesting with her customers, and asks him teasingly if he is off to see his sweetheart in the south again. "I've other things to think of," says Eleseus. "I'm out on business, opening up connections." "No call to be so free with your betters, Katrine," says her father reprovingly. Oh, Brede Olsen is all respect towards Eleseus, mighty respectful for him to be. And well he may, 'tis but wise of him, seeing he owes money up at Storborg, and here's his creditor before him. And Eleseus, ho, all this deference pleases him, and he is kind and gracious in return, calls Brede, "My dear sir," in jest, and goes on that way. He mentions that he has forgotten his umbrella. "Just as we were passing Breidablik, I thought of it, left my umbrella behind." Brede asks, "You'll be going over to our little store this evening, belike, for a drink?" Says Eleseus, "Ay, maybe, if 'twas only myself, but I've my father here." Brede makes himself pleasant and goes on gossiping. "There's a fellow coming in day after tomorrow that's on his way to America." "Been home, do you mean?" "Ay, he's from up in the village a bit, been away for ever so many years, and home for the winter. His trunk's come down already by cart, and a mighty fine trunk." "I've thought of going to America myself once or twice," says Eleseus frankly. "You?" cries Brede. "Why, there's little need for the likes of you going that way, surely." "Well, 'twas not going over to stay forever I was thinking, but I've been travelling about so many places now, I might just as well make the trip over there." "Ay, of course, and why not? And a heap of money and means and all, so they say, in America. Here's this fellow I spoke of before. He's paid for more feasting and parties than's easy to count this winter past, and comes in here and says to me, 'Let's have some coffee, a potful, and all the cakes you've got.' Like to see his trunk?" They went out in the passage to look at the trunk, a wonder to look at on earth, flaming all sides and corners with metal clasps and binding, and 3 flaps to hold it down, not to speak of a lock. "Burglar-proof," says Brede, as if he had tried it himself. They went back into the room, but Eleseus was grown thoughtful. This American from up in the village had outdone him. He was nothing beside such a man. Going out on journeys like any high official. Ay, natural enough that Brede should make a fuss of him. Eleseus ordered more coffee, and tried to play the rich man too, ordered cakes with his coffee and gave them to the dog, and all the time feeling worthless and dejected. What was his trunk beside that wonder out there? There it stood, black canvas with the corners all rubbed and worn, a handbag, nothing more. Ho, but wait. He would buy a trunk when he got to the towns, a splendid one it would be, only wait. "'Tis a pity to feed the dog so," says Brede. And Eleseus feels better at that, and ready to show off again. "'Tis a marvel how a beast can get so fat," says he. One thought leading to another. Eleseus breaks off his talk with Brede and goes out into the shed to look at the horse. and there he takes out a letter from his pocket and opens it. He had put it away at once, never troubling to look what money was in it. He had had letters of that sort from home before, and always a deal of notes inside, something to help him on the way. What was this? A big sheet of grey paper, scrawled all over. Little Rebecca to her brother Eleseus, and a few words from his mother. What else? Nothing else. No money at all. His mother wrote that she could not ask his father for money again now, for there was none too much left of all they had got for the copper mine that time. The money had gone to buy Storborg, and pay all the goods after, and Eleseus's travelling about. He must try and manage by himself this time, for the money that was left would have to be kept for his brother and sisters, not to leave them all without. And a pleasant journey and your loving mother. No money. Eleseus himself had not enough for his fare. He had cleaned out the cash box at Storborg, and that was not much. Oh, but he had been a fool to send that money to the dealers in Bergen on account. No hurry for that. He might have let it stand over. He ought, of course, to have opened the letter before starting out at all. He might have saved himself that journey down to the village with his miserable trunk and all, and here he was. His father comes back from the smith's after settling his business there. Jensine was to go back with him next morning, and Jensine, look you, had been nowise contrary and hard to persuade, but saw at once they wanted help at Sellanraa for the summer, and was ready to come. A proper way to do, again. While his father is talking, Eleseus sits thinking of his own affairs. He shows him the American's trunk, and says, "Only wish I was where that's come from." And his father answers, "Ay, 'twas none so bad, maybe." Next morning, Isak gets ready to start for home again. Has his food, puts in the horse, and drives round by the smith's to fetch Jensine and her box. Eleseus stands looking after them as they go. Then when they are lost to sight in the woods, he pays his score at the lodging house again, and something over. "You can leave my trunk here till I come back," he tells Katrine, and off he goes. Eleseus, going where? Only one place to go. He turns back, going back home again. So he too takes the road up over the hills again, taking care to keep as near his father and Jensine as he can without being seen. Walks on and on, beginning now to envy every soul of them in the wilds. 'Tis a pity about Eleseus, so changed he is and all. Is he doing no business at Storborg? Such as it is, nothing to make a fortune out of there, and Eleseus is overmuch out and abroad, making pleasant journeys on business to open up connections, and it costs too much, he does not travel cheaply. Doesn't do to be mean, says Eleseus, and gives 20 ore over where he might save 10. The business cannot support a man of his tastes, he must get subsidies from home. There's the farm at Storborg, with potatoes and corn and hay enough for the place itself, but all provisions else must come from Sellanraa. Is that all? Sivert must cart up his brother's goods from the steamer, all for nothing. And is that all? His mother must get money out of his father to pay for his journeys. But is that all? The worst is to come. Eleseus manages his business like a fool. It flatters him to have folk coming up from the village to buy at Storborg, so that he gives them credit as soon as asked. And when that is noised abroad, there come still more of them to buy the same way. The whole thing is going to rack and ruin. Eleseus is an easy man, and lets it go. The store is emptied, and the store is filled again. All costs money. And who pays it? His father. At first, his mother had been a faithful spokesman for him every way. Eleseus was the clever head of the family. They must help him on, and give him a start. Then think how cheaply he had got Storborg, and saying straight out what he would give for it. When his father thought it was going wrong somehow with the business, and naught but foolery, she took him up. "How can you stand there and say such things?" Ay, she reproved him for using such words about his son. Isak was forgetting his place, it seemed, to speak so of Eleseus. But look you, his mother had been out in the world herself. She understood how hard it was for Eleseus to live in the wilds, being used to better things, and accustomed to move in society, and with none of his equals near. He risked too much in his dealings with folk that were none of the soundest, but even so, 'twas not done with any evil intent on his part of ruining his parents, but sheer goodness of heart and noble nature. 'Twas his way to help those that were not so fine and grand as himself. Why, wasn't he the only man in those parts to use white handkerchiefs that were always having to be washed? When folk came trustingly to him and asked for credit, if he were to say no, they might take it amiss. It might seem as if he were not the noble fellow they had thought, after all. Also, he had a certain duty towards his fellows, as the town-bred man, the genius among them all. Ay, his mother bore all these things in mind. But his father, never understanding it all in the least, opened her eyes and ears one day and said, "Look you here, here's all that is left of the money from that mine." "That all?" said she. "And what's come of the rest?" "Eleseus, he's had the rest." And she clasped her hands at that and declared it was time Eleseus began to use his wits. Poor Eleseus, all set on end and frittered away. Better, maybe, if he'd worked on the land all the time, but now he's a man that has learned to write and use letters. No grip in him, no depth. For all that, no pitch-black devil of a man, not in love, not ambitious, hardly nothing at all is Eleseus, not even a bad thing of any great dimensions. Something unfortunate, ill-fated about this young man, as if something were rotting him from within. That engineer from the town, good man, better perhaps if he had not discovered the lad in his youth and taken him up to make something out of him. The child had lost his root-hold and suffered thereby. All that he turns to now leads back to something wanting in him, something dark against the light. Eleseus goes on and on. The two in the cart ahead pass by Storborg. Eleseus goes a long way round, and he too passes by. What was he to do there, at home, at his trading station and store? The two in the cart get to Sellanraa at nightfall. Eleseus is close at their heels, sees Sivert come out in the yard, all surprised to see Jensine, and the two shake hands and laugh a little. Then Sivert takes the horse out and leads it to the stable. Eleseus ventures forward. The pride of the family, he ventures up a little, not walking up, but stealing up. He comes on Sivert in the stable. "'Tis only me," he says. "What, you two?" says Sivert, all astonished again. The two brothers begin talking quietly, about Sivert getting his mother to find some money, a last resource, the money for a journey. Things can't go on this way. Eleseus is weary of it. He has been thinking of it a long time now, and he must go tonight, a long journey, to America, and start tonight. "America?" says Sivert out loud. "Shh! I've been thinking of it a long time, and you must get her to do as I say. It can't go on like this, and I've been thinking of going for ever so long." "But America," says Sivert. "No, don't you do it." "I'm going, I've settled that. Going back now to catch the boat." "But you must have something to eat." "I'm not hungry." "But rest a bit then." "No." Sivert is trying to act for the best, and hold his brother back, but Eleseus is determined, ay, for once he is determined. Sivert himself is all taken aback. First of all it was a surprise to see Jensine again, and now here's Eleseus going to leave the place altogether, not to say the world. "What about Storborg?" says he. "What'll you do with it?" "Andresen can have it," says Sivert. "Andresen have it? How do you mean?" "Isn't he going to have Leopoldine?" "Don't know about that. Ay, perhaps he is." They talk quietly, keep on talking. Sivert thinks it would be best if his father came out and Eleseus could talk to him himself, but no, no, whispers Eleseus again. He was never much of a man to face a thing like that, but always must have a go-between. Says Sivert, well, mother, you know how 'tis with her. There'll be no getting any way with her for crying and talking on. She mustn't know. No, Eleseus agrees, she mustn't know. Sivert goes off, stays away for ages, and comes back with money, a heap of money. Here, that's all he has. Think it'll be enough? Count. He didn't count how much there was. What did he say? Father? Nay, he didn't say much. Now you must wait a little, and I'll get some more clothes on and go down with you. 'Tis not worth your while. You go and lie down. Ho! Are you frightened of the dark that I mustn't go away? Says Sivert, trying a moment to be cheerful. He is away a moment, and comes back dressed, and with his father's food basket over his shoulder. As they go out, there is their father standing outside. So you're going all that way, seems, says Isak. Ay, answered Eleseus, but I'll be coming back again. I'll not be keeping you now, there's little time, mumbles the old man and turns away. Good luck, he croaks out in a strange voice, and goes off all hurriedly. The two brothers walk down the road. A little way gone, they sit down to eat. Eleseus is hungry, can hardly eat enough. 'Tis a fine spring night, and the black grouse at play on the hilltops. The homely sound makes the immigrant lose courage for a moment. 'Tis a fine night, says he. You better turn back now, Sivert, says he. Says Sivert, and goes on with him. They pass by Storborg, by Breidablik, and the sound follows them all the way from the hills here and there. 'Tis no military music like in the towns, nay, but voices, a proclamation. Spring has come. Then suddenly the first chirp of a bird is heard from a treetop, waking others, and a calling and answering on every side. More than a song, it is a hymn of praise. The immigrant feels homesick already, maybe, something weak and helpless in him. He is going off to America, and none could be more fitted to go than he. You can turn back now, Sivert, says he. Ay, well, says his brother, if you'd rather. They sit down at the edge of the wood, and see the village just below them. The store and the quay, Brede's old lodging house. Some men are moving about by the steamer, getting ready. Well, no time to stay sitting here, says Eleseus, getting up again. Fancy you going all that way, says Sivert. And Eleseus answers, but I'll be coming back again, and I'll have a better sort of trunk that journey. As they say goodbye, Sivert thrusts something into his brother's hand, a bit of something wrapped in paper. What is it? Asks Eleseus. Don't forget to write often, says Sivert, and so he goes. Eleseus opens the paper and looks. 'Tis the gold piece, 25 kroner in gold. Here, don't! He calls out. You mustn't do that. Sivert walks on a little, then turns round and sits down again at the edge of the wood. More folk astir now, down by the steamer. Passengers going on board. Eleseus going on board. The boat pushes off from the side and rows away, and Eleseus is gone to America. He never came back. End of chapter 11. Book 2, Chapter 12, of Growth of the Soil, by Knut Hamsun, translated by W. Worcester. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12. A notable procession coming up to Sellanraa. Something laughable to look at, maybe, but more than that. 3 men with enormous burdens, with sacks hanging down from their shoulders, front and back, walking one behind the other, and calling to one another with jesting words, but heavily laden. Little Andresen, chief clerk, is head of that procession. Indeed, 'tis his procession. He has fitted out himself, and Sivert from Sellanraa, and one other Fredrik Ström from Breidablik, for the expedition. A notable little man is Andresen. His shoulder is weighed down slantwise on one side, and his jacket pulled all awry at the neck, the way he goes, but he carries his burden on and on. Storborg and the business Eleseus had left, well, not bought it straight out on the spot perhaps, 'tis more than Andresen could afford. Better afford to wait a bit and get the whole maybe for nothing. Andresen is no fool. He has taken over the place on lease for the meanwhile, and manages the business himself. Gone through the stock in hand, and found a deal of unsaleable truck in Eleseus' store, even to such things as toothbrushes and embroidered table centers, ay, and stuffed birds on springs that squeaked when you pressed in the right place. These are the things he has started out with now, going to sell them to the miners on the other side of the hills. He knows from Aronsen's time that miners with money in their pockets will buy anything on earth. Only a pity he had to leave behind 6 rocking horses that Eleseus had ordered on his last trip to Bergen. The caravan turns into the yard at Sellanraa and sets down its load. No long wait here. They drink a mug of milk and make pretence of trying to sell their wares on the spot, then shoulder their burdens and off again. They are not out for pretence. Off they go, trundling southward through the forest. They march till noon, rest for a meal, and on again till evening. Then they camp and make a fire, lie down, and sleep a while. Sivert sleeps resting on a boulder that he calls an armchair. Oh, Sivert knows what he is about. Here's the sun been warming that boulder all day, till it's a good place to sit and sleep. His companions are not so wise, and will not take advice. They lie down in the heather, and wake up feeling cold and sneezing. Then they have breakfast and start off again, listening now for any sound of blasting about. They are hoping to come on the mine, and meet with folk sometime that day. The work should have got so far by now, a good way up from the water towards Sellanraa, but never a sound of blasting anywhere. They march till noon, meeting never a soul. But here and there they come upon holes in the ground, where men have been digging for trial. What can this mean? Means, no doubt, that the ore must be commonly rich at the farther end of the tract. They are getting out pure heavy copper, and keeping to that end all the time. In the afternoon they come upon several more mines, but no miners. They march on till evening, and already they can make out the sea below, marching through a wilderness of deserted mines, and never a sound. 'Tis all beyond understanding, but nothing for it. They must camp and sleep out again that night. They talk the matter over. Can the work have stopped? Should they turn and go back again? Not a bit of it, says Andresen. Next morning a man walks into their camp, a pale, haggard man, who looks at them frowningly, piercingly. "That you, Andresen?" says the man. It is Aronsen, Aronsen the trader. He does not say no to a cup of hot coffee and something to eat with the caravan, and settles down at once. "I saw the smoke of your fire, and came up to see what it was," says he. "I said to myself, sure enough, they're coming to their senses and starting work again. And 'twas only you after all. Where you making for then?" "Here." "What's that you've got with you?" "Goods." "Goods?" cries Aronsen. "Coming up here with goods for sale? Who's to buy them? There's never a soul. They left last Saturday gone." "Left? Who left?" "All the lot, not a soul on the place now. And I've goods enough myself anyway, a whole store packed full. I'll sell you anything you like." Oh, Trader Aronsen in difficulties again. The mine has shut down. They ply him with coffee till he grows calmer, and asks what it all means. Aronsen shakes his head despairingly. "'Tis beyond understanding, there's no words for it," says he. All had been going so well, and he had been selling goods, and money pouring in. The village round all flourishing, and using the finest meal, and a new schoolhouse, and hanging lamps and town-made boots, and all. Then suddenly their lordships up at the mine take it into their heads that the thing isn't paying, and close down. Not paying, but it paid them before. Wasn't there clean copper there, and plain to see at every blasting? 'Twas rank cheating, no less. And never thought of what it means to a man like me. Ay, I doubt it's as they say. 'Tis that Geissler's at the bottom of it all, same as before. No sooner he'd come up than the work stopped. 'Twas as if he'd smelt it out somehow. Geissler, is he here then? Is he not? Ought to be shot, he ought. Comes up one day by the steamer and says to the engineer, "Well, how's things going?" "All right as far as I can see," says the engineer. But Geissler he just stands there, and asks again, "Oh, all right, is it?" "Ay, as far as I know," says the engineer. But as true as I'm here, no sooner the post comes up from that same boat Geissler had come by, and there's letter and telegram both to the engineer that the work wasn't paying, and he's to shut down at once. The members of the expedition look at one another, but the leader, Andersen himself, has not lost courage yet. "You may just as well turn back and go home again," is Aronsen's advice. "We're not doing that," says Andersen, and packs up the coffee pot. Aronsen stares at the three of them in turn. "You're mad then," says he. Look you, Andersen he cares little now for what his master that was can say. He's master himself now, leader of an expedition equipped at his own expense for a journey to distant parts. 'Twould lose him his prestige to turn back now where he is. "Well, where will you go?" asks Aronsen irritably. "Can't say," answers Andersen. But he's a notion of his own all the same, no doubt, thinking maybe of the natives, and coming down into the district 3 men strong, with glass beads and finger rings. "We'll be getting on," says he to the rest. Now, Aronsen had thought like enough to go farther up that morning, seeing he'd come so far, wanting maybe to see if all the place was quite deserted. If it could be true every man on the place was gone. But seeing these peddler folk so set on going on, it hinders him, and he tells them again and again they're mad to try. Aronsen is furious himself, marches down into the front of the caravan, turning round and shouting at them, barking at them, trying to keep them out of his district. And so they come down to the huts in the mining centre. A little town of huts, but empty and desolate. Most of the tools and implements are housed under cover, but poles and planks, broken carts and cases and barrels, lie all about in disorder. Here and there, a notice on a door declares, "No admittance." "There you are," cries Aronsen. "What did I say? Not a soul in the place." And he threatens the caravan with disaster. He will send for the Lensmand. Anyway, he's going to follow them every step now, and if he can catch them at any unlawful trading, 'tis penal servitude and slavery, no mistake. All at once, somebody calls out for Sivert. The place is not altogether dead, after all, not utterly deserted. Here is a man standing beckoning at the corner of a house. Sivert trundles over with his load, and sees at once who it is. Geissler. "Funny meeting you here," says Geissler. His face is red and flourishing, but his eyes apparently cannot stand the glare of spring. He is wearing smoked glasses. He talks as brilliantly as ever. "Luckiest thing in the world," says he. "Save me going all the way up to Sellanraa, and I've a deal to look after. How many settlers are there in the Almenning now?" "10. 10 new holdings, I'll agree, I'm satisfied. But 'tis 32,000 men of your father's stamp the country wants. Ay, that's what I say, and I mean it. I've reckoned it out." "Sivert, are you coming on?" The caravan is waiting. Geissler hears and calls back sharply, "No." "I'll come on after," calls Sivert, and sets down his load. The 2 men sit down and talk. Geissler is in the right mood today, the spirit moves him, and he talks all the time, only pausing when Sivert puts in a word or so in answer, and then goes on again. A mighty lucky thing, can't help saying it. Everything turned out just as I wanted all the way up. And now meeting you here, and saving all the journey to Sellanraa. All well at home, what? All well, and thank you kindly. Got up that hayloft yet, over the cowshed? Ay, 'tis done. Well, well, I've a heap of things to look to, almost more than I can manage. Look at where we're sitting now, for instance. What do you say to that, Sivert man? Ruined city, eh? Men gone about to build it, all against their nature and well-being. Properly speaking, it's all my fault from the start. That is to say, I'm a humble agent in the workings of fate. It all began when your father picked up some bits of stone up in the hills, and gave you to play with when you were a child. That was how it started. I knew well enough those bits of stone were worth exactly as much as men would give for them, no more. Well and good, I set a price on them myself, and bought them. Then the stones passed from hand to hand, and did no end of damage. Time went on, and now, a few days ago, I came up here again, and what for, do you think? To buy those stones back again. Geissler stops for a moment and looks at Sivert. Then suddenly he glances at the sack and asks, "What's that you're carrying?" "Goods," says Sivert. "We're taking them down to the village." Geissler does not seem interested in the answer. Has not even heard it, like as not. He goes on. "Buy them back again, yes. Last time I let my son manage the deal. He sold them then. Young fellow about your own age, that's all about him. He's the lightning in the family. I'm more a sort of fog. Know what's the right thing to do, but don't do it. And he's the lightning, and he's entered the service of industry for the time being. 'Twas he sold for me last time. I'm something and he's not. He's only the lightning, quick to act, modern type. But the lightning by itself's a barren thing. Look at you folk at Sellanraa now, looking up at blue peaks every day of your lives. No newfangled inventions about that, but field and rocky peaks, rooted deep in the past. And you've them for companionship. There you are, living in touch with heaven and earth, one with them, one with all these wide, deep-rooted things. No need of a sword in your hands. You go through life bareheaded, barehanded, in the midst of a great kindliness. Look, nature's there, for you and yours to have and enjoy. Man and nature don't bombard each other, but agree. They don't compete, race one against the other, but go together. There's you Sellanraa folk, in all this, living there. Field and forest, moors and meadow, and sky and stars. Oh, 'tis not poor and sparingly counted out, but without measure. Listen to me, Sivert, you be content. You've everything to live on, everything to live for, everything to believe in. Being born and bringing forth, you are the needful on earth. 'Tis not all that are so, but you are so, needful on earth. 'Tis you that maintain life, generation to generation, breeding ever anew. And when you die, the new stock goes on. That's the meaning of eternal life. What do you get out of it? An existence innocently and properly set towards all. What you get out of it? Nothing can put you under orders and lord it over you Sellanraa folk. You've peace and authority, and this great kindliness all around. That's what you get for it. You lie at a mother's breast and suck, and play with a mother's warm hand. There's your father now. He's one of the 32,000. What's to be said of many another? I'm something, I'm the fog, as it were, here and there, floating around, sometimes coming like rain on dry ground. But the others, there's my son, the lightning, that's nothing in itself, a flash of barrenness. He can act. My son, ay, he's the modern type, a man of our time. He believes honestly enough all the age has taught him, all the Jew and the Yankee have taught him. I shake my head at it all. But there's nothing mythical about me. 'Tis only in the family, so to speak, that I'm like a fog. Sit there shaking my head. Tell the truth, I've not the power of doing things and not regretting it. If I had, I could be lightning myself. Now I'm a fog. Suddenly Geisler seems to recollect himself, and asks, "Got up that hayloft yet, above the cowshed?" "Ay, that's done, and father's put up a new house." "New house?" "'Tis in case any one should come," he says. "In case Geisler, he should happen to come along." Geisler thinks over this, and takes his decision. "Well then, I'd better come. Yes, I'll come. You can tell your father that. But I've a heap of things to look to. Came up here and told the engineer to let his people in Sweden know I was ready to buy, and we'd see what happened. All the same to me, no hurry. You ought to have seen that engineer. Here he's been going about and keeping it all up with men and horses and money and machines, and any amount of fuss. Thought it was all right. Knew no better. The more bits of stone he can turn into money, the better. He thinks he's doing something clever and deserving, bringing money to the place, to the country, and everything nearing disaster more and more, and he's none the wiser. 'Tis not money the country wants, there's more than enough of it already. 'Tis men like your father there's not enough of. Ay, turning the means to an end in itself, and being proud of it. They're mad, diseased, they don't work, they know nothing of the plough, only the dice. Mighty deserving of them, isn't it? Working and wasting themselves to nothing in their own mad way. Look at them. Staking everything, aren't they? There's but this much wrong with it all. They forget that gambling isn't courage. 'Tis not even foolhardy courage. 'Tis a horror. Do you know what gambling is? 'Tis fear. With the sweat on your brow, that's what it is. What's wrong with them is, they won't keep pace with life, but want to go faster, race on, tear on ahead, driving themselves into life itself like wedges. And then the flanks of them say, "Here, stop! There's something breaking. Find a remedy. Stop! Stop," say the flanks. And then life crushes them, politely but firmly crushes them. And then they set to complaining about life, raging against life, each to his own taste. Some may have ground to complain, others not, but there's none should rage against life. Not be stern and strict and just with life, but be merciful to it, and take its part. Only think of the gamblers life has to bear with. Geisler recollects himself again, and says, "Well, that's all as it may be, leave it." He is evidently tired, beginning to breathe in little gasps. "Going down," says he. "Ay. There's no hurry. You owe me a long walk over the hills, Sivert man, remember that." "I remember it all. I remember the time I was a year and a half, stood leaning down from the barn bridge at Garmo, and noticed a smell. I can smell it again now. But all that's as it may be, that too. But we might have done that trip over the hills, now if you hadn't got that sack. What's in it?" "Goods. 'Tis Andersen is going to sell them." "Well then, I'm a man that knows what's the right thing to do, but doesn't do it," says Geisler. "I'm the fog. Now perhaps I'll buy that mine back one of these days, it's not impossible. But if I do, it wouldn't be to go about staring up at the sky and saying aerial railway, South America. No, leave that to the gamblers. Folk hereabout say I must be the devil himself because I knew beforehand this was going to break up. But there's nothing mystical about me, 'tis simple enough. The new copper mine's in Montana, that's all. The Yankees are smarter than we are at that game. They are cutting us to death in South America. Our ore here's too poor. My son's the lightning, he's got the news, and I came floating up here. Simple, isn't it? I beat those fellows in Sweden by a few hours, that's all." Geisler is short of breath again. He gets on his feet and says, "If you're going down, let's get along." They go on down together, Geisler dragging behind, all tired out. The caravan has stopped at the quay, and Fredrik Ström, cheerful as ever, is poking fun at Aronsen. "I'm clean out of tobacco. Got any tobacco, what?" "I'll give you tobacco," says Aronsen threateningly. Fredrik laughs and says comfortingly, "Nay, you've no call to take it all heavy like and sad, Aronsen. We're just going to sell these things here before your eyes, and then we'll be off home again." Get away and wash your dirty mouth, says Aronsen furiously. Ha ha ha! Nay, you've no call to dance about that way. Keep still and look like a picture. Geisler is tired, tired out. Even his smoked glasses do not help him now. His eyes keep closing in the glare. Goodbye, Sivert man, says he all at once. No, I can't get up to Sellanraa this time, after all. Tell your father I've a heap of things to see to, but I'll come later on. Say that. Aronsen spits after him, and says, Ought to be shot. For 3 days the caravan peddles its wares, selling out the contents of the sacks, and getting good prices. It was a brilliant piece of business. The village folk were still well supplied with money after the downfall of the mine, and were excellently in form in the way of spending. Those stuffed birds on springs were the very thing they wanted. They set them up on chests of drawers in their parlours, and also bought nice paper knives, the very thing for cutting the leaves of an almanac. Aronsen was furious. Just as if I hadn't things every bit as good in my store, said he. Trader Aronsen was in a sorry way. He had made up his mind to keep with these peddlers and their sacks, watching them all the time. But they went separate ways about the village, each for himself. And Aronsen almost tore himself to pieces, trying to follow all at once. First he gave up Fredrik Ström, who was quickest at saying unpleasant things. Then Sivert, because he never said a word, but went on selling. At last he stuck to following his former clerk, and trying to set folk against him wherever he went. Oh, but Andersen knew his master that was, knew him of old, and how little he knew of business and unlawful trading. Ho, you mean to say English thread's not prohibited, said Aronsen, looking wise. I know it is, answered Andersen. But I'm not carrying any this way. I can sell that elsewhere. I haven't a reel in my pack. Look for yourself if you like. That's as it may be, says Aronsen. Anyway, I know what's forbidden, and I've shown you, so don't try to teach me. Aronsen stood it for a whole day, then he gave up Andersen too, and went home. The peddlers had no one to watch them after that. And then things began to go swimmingly. It was in the day when women folk used to wear plaits in their hair, and Andersen, he was the man to sell loose plaits. Ay, at a pinch he could sell fair plaits to dark girls, and be sorry he'd nothing lighter. No grey plaits, for instance, for that was the finest of all. And every evening the 3 young salesmen met at an appointed place and went over the day's trade, each borrowing from another anything he'd sold out of. And Andersen would sit down, often as not, and take out a file, and file away the German trademark from a sportsman's whistle, or rub out Faber on the pens and pencils. Andersen was a trump, and always had been. Sivert, on the other hand, was rather a disappointment. Not that he was any way slack, and failed to sell his goods. 'Twas he, indeed, sold most. But he did not get enough for them. You don't put in enough patter with it, said Andersen. No, Sivert was no hand at reeling off a lot of talk. He was a field worker, sure of what he did, and speaking calmly when he spoke at all. What was there to talk about here? Also, Sivert was anxious to be done with it and get back home. There was work to do in the fields. "'Tis that Jensen's calling him," Fredrik Ström explained. Fredrik himself, by the way, had work on his own fields to be done that spring, and little time to waste, but for all that, he must look in on Aronsen the last day and get up an argument with him. "I'll sell him the empty sacks," said he. Andersen and Sivert stayed outside while he went in. They heard grand goings-on inside the store, both talking at once, and Fredrik setting up a laugh now and again. Then Aronsen threw open the door and showed his visitor out. Oh, but Fredrik didn't come out. No, he took his time and talked a lot more. The last thing they heard from outside was Fredrik trying to sell Aronsen a lot of rocking horses. Then the caravan went home again, 3 young men full of life and health. They marched and sang, slept a few hours in the open, and went on again. When they got back to Sellanraa on the Monday, Isak had begun sowing. The weather was right for it, the air moist, with the sun peeping out now and again, and a mighty rainbow strung right across the heavens. The caravan broke up. Farvel, farvel. Isak at his sowing, a stump of a man, a barge of a man to look at, nothing more. Clad in homespun, wool from his own sheep, boots from the hide of his own cows and calves, sowing. And he walks religiously bareheaded to that work. His head is bald just at the very top, but all the rest of him shamefully hairy. A fan, a wheel of hair and beard, stands out from his face. 'Tis Isak the Margrave. 'Twas rarely he knew the day of the month. What need had he of that? He had no bills to be sent on a certain date. The marks of his almanac were to show the time when each of the cows should bear. But he knew St. Olaf's Day in the autumn, that by then his hay must be in, and he knew Candlemas in spring, and that 3 weeks after then the bears came out of their winter quarters. All seed must be in the earth by then. He knew what was needful. A tiller of the ground, body and soul, a worker on the land without respite, a ghost risen out of the past to point the future, a man from the earliest days of cultivation, a settler in the wilds, 900 years old, and, withal, a man of the day. Nay, there was nothing left to him now of the copper mine and its riches. The money had vanished into air. And who had anything left of all that wealth when the working stopped, and the hills lay dead and deserted? But the Almenning was still there, and 10 new holdings on that land, beckoning 100 more. Nothing growing there, all things growing there, men and beasts and fruit of the soil. Isak sowing his grain. The evening sunlight falls on the grain that flashes out in an arc from his hand, and falls like a dropping of gold to the ground. Here comes Sivert to the harrowing, after that the roller, and then the harrow again. Forest and field look on, all is majesty and power, a sequence and purpose of things. Cling-a-ling, say the cowbells, far up on the hillside, coming nearer and nearer. The cattle are coming home for the night, 15 head of them, and 45 sheep and goats beside, 60 in all. There go the women out with their milk pails, carried on yokes from the shoulder. Leopoldine, Jensine, and little Rebecca, all 3 barefooted. The Margravine, Inger herself, is not with them. She is indoors, preparing the meal. Tall and stately, as she moves about her house, a vestal, tending the fire of the kitchen stove. Inger has made her stormy voyage, 'tis true, has lived in a city a while, but now she is home. The world is wide, swarming with tiny specks. Inger has been one of them. All but nothing in all humanity, only one speck. Then comes the evening. End of chapter 12. End of Growth of the Soil.